Chapter 981. The Jale Passage was indeed the longest space passage discovered by the humans. While the huge battleship that evacuated the populace was still isolated from the outside world in the passage, the battleships that had received the order to besiege her had increased from more than 300 to more than 1,000, and 3 ascendants had arrived at the same time. Now, there were already 6 immortals and a medium-sized fleet in the universe outside the Gray Passage. In the previous battles against the Sea of Dark Matter, such a powerful force was enough to solve all the problems, no matter how dangerous the situation was. The expression on Chunya's face was as cold as ever, and the devil man in black standing behind him remarked, "We still can't defeat her." Even though the Snow Girl had lost most of her strength in the battle against the 9 Dark Ones, she still couldn't defeat her. This was the unshakable understanding of the cultivation practitioners in Chaotian. Their fear of the Queen was like the black hole that the human civilization didn't dare approach. It was enough to shake the firmest Tao heart and the strongest willpower. The universe is very large, and the speed of light is very slow, said Chunya. As long as one was in this universe, one had to obey the physical rules of the universe, and the Snow Girl was no exception. Her speed couldn't exceed the speed of light. As such, her destructive power would be weakened by the distance in such a large space in the universe, making it possible for her to be defeated. The other devil man in black said with narrowed eyes, "If she is indeed a life form built on the basis of negative entropy, as we have guessed over the years, and she can survive indefinitely in the cold universe. But this life form is more suitable to fight against the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter, not the nuclear weapons. The battleships can pose a great threat to her. Otherwise, why has she been hiding all these years?" The devil man in black shot him a sideways glance and said in a mocking tone, "Do you think Her Majesty is hiding from us in these battleships?" Chunya said expressionlessly, "No matter how powerful she is, I believe she will still die if she is thrown into the permanent star. The laser cannons, plasma cannons, and most importantly, the gravitational field output equipment on the battleships should be useful." Hearing this, the 2 devil men in black didn't say anything more. It was because this was not Chunya's judgment, nor was it the result of the Ascendant's deduction, but the plan given by that person. The central computer wouldn't make a mistake in this regard, at least not yet. More than 1,000 battleships outside the Jale Passage had activated their weapon systems and were ready to carry out the plan. The command ship that Chunya and the 2 black-clad Yao Immortals were on was at the forefront of the entire fleet. It was responsible for the most important task, which was to capture the gravitational field. At this moment, a mechanical and cold electronic beep suddenly sounded in the battleship. The warship is about to enter the spatial passage. All systems, prepare to shut down. Chunya's face swiftly sank. The 2 black-clad Yao Immortals were quick to react as well. Instantly, they used their divine senses to invade the command system. They wanted to stop it, but it was already too late. Following the mechanical electronic beep, the gravitational field generator in front of the command ship slowly retracted, followed by the plasma cannons and various weapon bases. The officers and soldiers in the command ship were extremely shocked. They stood in front of the control panel and kept operating. But even the divine senses of the 2 black-robed demon immortals could not stop all this. So how could they do it? Someone shouted blankly, "What's going on? Why are they all ineffective?" Remote command, with the highest authority, directly bypassing the system wall and activating the warship's self-locking program. The 2 black-robed monster immortals looked at Chunya and quickly transmitted the results of the investigation with their divine senses. Their faces were somewhat pale. That remote command made the command system of the battleship believe that they were about to enter a spatial passage, so the battleship had to enter a completely sealed state. It was also called the state of absolute silence. Any attempt to break the state of silence on the battleship, regardless of whether it was done internally or externally, would trigger the self-explosion of the battleship. It was because the spacecrafts in the warped black holes were not allowed to conduct any observation. This was the iron law of space navigation in the Federation of the Milky Way, or rather, the federation of the distant ancient civilization. As for why it was so, it was only known by the early experiments of the human civilization and the central computer left behind. Later, with the appearance of the sea of dark matter, some people had vaguely guessed the truth. Like the humans' understanding of the quantum world, observation would always bring about problems. This iron law of space navigation solved the problem fundamentally. It was crude and low-level, but it was safe. Nobody had expected that this iron law would be used by someone to deal with the battleship one day. The two black-clad Yao immortals didn't look so terrible because the battleship was sealed. They could break out of the battleship by force, and the self-explosion of the battleship wouldn't hurt them. The real reason was who had issued the order with the highest authority. It was a simple conjecture, but it led to a shocking and disturbing conclusion. The mechanical and monotonous electronic voice was still ringing. Chunya and the officers and soldiers on the battleship had never found this sound so annoying. The weapon system had been retracted, and the observation system was being shut down one by one. The engine was being shut down, and the high composite material plates were falling down from the top of the battleship, giving off a dull and annoying grinding sound. The same thing was happening on the other 1,000 battleships in the other places in the universe, on the portable space stations, on the mining spaceships, and on all the spacecrafts that could travel through the space. The sudden change had caused a great deal of chaos. It was rare for the universe to be as lively as it was at this moment. It was impossible for the battleship to enter the state of absolute silence in an instant, but it still had some time to react. Chunya, the two black-clad Yao immortals, and the other immortals on the battleship flew out of the battleship as soon as they could and arrived in the vacuum. They didn't forget to bring the supermicro nuclear power furnace with them. Some swordsmen in the military intended to leave the battleship in the mechas, but they were strictly stopped by Chunya in the command system. He knew very well that the coming battle would be very dangerous, and that even the Star State generals would be of no use except to die. The 1,000 battleships outside the Gray Passage thus entered the state of silence and could no longer receive any signals from inside. The pale blue flame at the rear of the engines had also been extinguished, and even the dim reflection of the hull seemed to have disappeared, turning into a lifeless existence. Chunya looked back at the battleships as if he was looking at 1,000 coffins. His eyes became extremely cold as he thought that the 100,000 battleships in the three fleets might have become like this. He pressed the wristband to switch the channel and entered the quantum communication system specially built for the cocoon breakers. He confirmed the situation in other places and realized that it was as he had expected, and realized that the worst-case scenario had become true. There was a problem with the central computer. He knew that Zhao Leiyu, who had been watching that person from the main planet, had done something, although he didn't know how she did it. Fortunately, according to the rules left by the gods, the central computer could not directly perform physical operations, at least in this aspect. Otherwise, Zhao Leiyu would only need to order the battleships to attack them, and they would have no choice but to flee. Sung Ju's voice rang in the quantum communication system, followed by the voices of more ascenders. The wisdom and decisiveness of the fairies far exceeded that of ordinary people. None of them were sealed in the silent battleships, but they were still somewhere in the distant universe. Without the battleships, they could not rush here to participate in the battle. Chunya turned to look at the dark exit of the Gray Passage that was glowing faintly, and thought of that sentence again. The exit was the entrance. He thought of this sentence at that time, not because he wanted to rush into the space passage to fight, but because he thought that whether he stood in the well or outside, the well's mouth was the same in his eyes. What do we do next? A demonic immortal in black asked. That's good. Next is the battle between us. Chunya took out a gray stone pestle, and then a magical weapon that looked like a green rope, slowly and attentively wrapping it around the pestle. Even without the battleships, the powerful long-range weapons, and the gravitational field capture device, he still did not think that he would lose. No one saw the scene of the final battle of Full Moon, but he firmly believed that no matter how powerful Snow Girl was, she must be extremely weak after killing the 9 virgins. As for Jingjio, as long as he did not dare to wake up, what difference was there between him and a dead man? The giant battleship was still moving forward in the gray passage. Actually, the word forward was not accurate to describe that state, but because no one had observed it in the passage, any description could be used, but it would not be accurate. This was a place that was truly isolated from the rest of the world. If it was Rujui, who had been educated by many early works of human civilization on the homeworld, he would easily associate the word paradise with the word paradise. But this was not a real paradise. People could not stay away from the conflicts of the human world for long. Sooner or later, they would have to leave, and even the longest gray passage could only allow them to escape for a little longer. The soldiers on the battleship and the evacuating civilians did not need to think about these problems. They were all in deep hibernation. Only Jingjio, Snow Girl, and Hua, she were awake. Not counting the ancestral masters of Aoyama, who were far away on the homeworld, they were the current rulers of human civilization. Huashi sat on the chair, her face expressionless. Jingjiu sat on the chair opposite her, the green rope of light sinking deeper into his wrist. It looked like it was already in his flesh. The green rope of light was on his wrist, but the pain was between his eyebrows. The pain was like a heavy stone, pressing on him, making him dizzy and extremely uncomfortable. It was like a serious sinus infection for ordinary people. It was not a blunt knife cutting the flesh, but a wooden hammer pounding on your face, trying to flatten your face. Even he could not bear the annoying pain that came from the depths of his spirit, his face turning paler than Snow Girl's. He poured himself a glass of hard liquor, which he rarely did. He looked at it but did not drink it. He said to Snow Girl, "I vaguely remember, on the field." Snow Girl understood what he meant. She looked at him sympathetically and disdainfully, like a shepherd looking at a dog. She reached out her chubby little hand and placed it between his eyes, passing an extremely cold breath to him. A streak of frost instantly formed on Jingjio's eyelashes, and his ordinary face suddenly had an eerie sense of beauty. After a while, he shivered. The green rope of light on his wrist dimmed a little. The pain between his eyebrows also lessened a lot, followed by a change in his eyes. His eyes became a little blank. It seemed like he had forgotten something. If his successor can control the central computer, it means that you will be controlled by him. Maybe it was because she saw Jingjio's state. Why she suddenly said such a sentence to Snow Girl. It was a very obvious but not clumsy attempt to sow discord. Existences like Snow Girl and Jingjio cared most about their own existence. The word existence here already meant free existence. They absolutely could not accept being controlled by others, no matter how. Snow Girl ignored Huashi, maybe because she was a little tired and did not want to talk. Jingjio put down the wine cup in his hand, looked at Huashi, and explained slowly and seriously. "I just didn't finish my sentence. You probably don't know. She made me accept her request when I was not awake." Huashi's body was now filled with that girl's consciousness. She really did not see that scene. She said in shock and anger, "You are actually willing to become her sword rather than shun Aoyama's sword to fight for humanity. If I fight for you, I might die." Jingjio seemed to be drunk and said with a lisp, "And just like you said, those children can now control her. So there is a balance between us. Control on both sides means no control." Huashi was silent for a while, and then said, "Not on both sides. Now it means that your successors can indirectly control you." Jingjio said, "You think too much." Huashi said, "How can you be sure that after not seeing them for hundreds of years, they are still them?" Jingjio rubbed the area between his eyebrows tiredly and said, "This war is over. Let's not talk anymore." Huashi said sarcastically, "Do you really think that this war has already been decided?" Jingjio said, "Yes, after the Snow Girl recovers, we will go and kill Shin Aoyama." Huashi said with a smile, "I think you don't know enough about the Grandmaster of your sect. If you work together, you might really be able to kill him. The problem is that you don't even dare to wake up and appear in front of him. Do you really think that the Snow Girl is invincible?" The Snow Girl turned around and looked at her with her black eyes. Her expression was indifferent as she let out two moans. Time passed slowly. No one in the huge battleship spoke anymore. The light music played automatically by the system had stopped at some point. Maybe the Snow Girl thought it was too noisy. They were about to reach the end of the Jia passage, and they did not know how far they were from the exit. The Snow Girl suddenly reached out and released a cold will. A huge ice block froze Hua, she in the middle. The ice block was not completely solid. There was enough space for her to turn around and stretch her body. It was obvious that this was not ordinary water that had turned into ice. The ice was unimaginably solid, and it was also much colder than 0 degrees Celsius. Huashi's small face quickly turned red and then white. She stared at the Snow Girl through the ice block and said, "Are you really not afraid that if you kill me, there will be another me outside?" The Snow Girl turned around and ignored her. Huashi suddenly felt that this feeling was very familiar. At least, her body was very familiar, as if she had experienced the same thing before. Jingjiu explained, "I can roughly remember that for the past year, she would freeze you like this every night." Huashi opened her eyes wide and asked in shock why. Jingjiu said, "It should be an experiment to see if you could be completely cut off from the outside world. With the Snow Girl's cultivation level, and the continuous experiment or practice for more than a year, there would definitely be no loopholes. This scheme that started from the underground sewers was too terrifying." Feeling hopeless, Huashi had no choice but to throw out the last straw, saying, "But you two still love the humans." The scheme that the Snow Girl and Jingjiu had set up from the underground sewers was, in essence, to obtain the freedom. The so-called freedom was to get rid of the mission given to them by that god, and it also meant to give up the responsibility toward the humans. What Huashi said was exactly what she meant. Jingjiu and the Snow Girl looked at Huashi in silence, as if they thought her question was ridiculous. Huashi folded her arms, looking at Jingjiu's eyes as if she was praying or praising him. "On the full moon planet, you helped those people open the alloy door and killed so many monsters of the sea of dark matter," she said earnestly. Then she turned to the Snow Girl and said, "You took a great risk to wipe out the 9 Dark Ones." It was true that they seemed to be indifferent and unfeeling, staying in the residential buildings of Foggy City, but they had done so many things in the end. What was it if not love? "You think too much," said Jingjiu. Chapter 982. Besides saying that he thought too much, Jingjiu didn't give any further explanation. It was because the reason why he went to the underground base and killed those monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter had nothing to do with him. Whether you admit it or not, we're not real humans. For the sake of humans, we're fighting here and there, talking about life and death. Is it because of the 3 laws? Or was it the urge and desire to become a god? Of course it's for love. All right, let's not talk about it. Huashi's gaze passed through the ice and fell on Jingjiu's face. She asked the last question. "Based on the principle of uncertainty, you won't kill me. Instead, you plan to imprison me until the end of time. Have you ever thought about what to do with this little girl?" Huashi was a young girl with an independent personality and soul. Now, she had become a cage that imprisoned the young girl's soul. If Jingjiu wanted to keep the young girl locked up, she would never be able to wake up. It was no different from death. If it was any other human, Jingjiu naturally wouldn't care about their life or death. However, Huashi had been Huashi most of the time from the Stargate base to the moon-gazing planet. She had accompanied him for a long time as his secretary, tour guide, and younger sister, and had cooked breakfast and steamed cakes for him many times. This was indeed a difficult question to answer. Even he did not know how to answer it, so he closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, they were clean, innocent, and alienated, as if he had turned back into the autistic young man who played the piano by the window. "Sister, you didn't sleep today. Why are you in the ice?" He looked at the flower stream in the ice and asked curiously. Huashi said helplessly, "If I don't know how to answer, then I'll turn back into a fool. Isn't that too shameless?" Jingjiu didn't understand what she was saying and felt a little tired. Looking at Shue Jie on the table, he subconsciously reached out and hugged her. Shuijie glanced at him and made sure that he had really turned back into that sick and lonely young man, and that he was not pretending. She then ignored him, while she put down her hands and looked at them outside the ice block. She knew that she couldn't convince them, so she closed her eyes and started to rest. It was like returning to that building, just like those ordinary nights. The battleship was silent. Tens of thousands of humans were sleeping with them. After an unknown amount of time, when Jingjio opened his eyes and woke up, an extremely faint ray of light shone through the window. The battleship had already left the gray passage and arrived at the universe space of the main star field. At this time, they still didn't know that the central computer had changed the wake-up signal. Only their battleships were able to automatically lift the absolute silent state after leaving the spatial channel as usual. Countless plates made of high-strength materials were flipped open one by one. Like scales being blown by the wind, countless silver lines appeared on the surface of the battleship. Strangely enough, the onboard computer did not issue an automatic notification, nor did it issue any commands. After a few seconds, as if there was some kind of buffer, a clear and pleasant voice sounded in the warship. "Hello, everyone." Jingjio felt like he had heard this voice somewhere before. He scratched his head, but couldn't remember where. "Ah, this is a very rare action. I mean, it happened to you. Not only is it a little cute, but your face is also much cuter than before. But what happened to you? Can't you tell who I am? Who are you?" The voice paused for a moment and then said again, "The most beloved girl, Qing whom you can't bear to deceive the most." "Really?" asked Jing Jio bewilderedly. Qing coughed twice and said earnestly, "Long time no see, Jing Jio. I'm here to take you home." There were many battleships floating in the universe outside the gray passage. The space was too vast, and it didn't feel densely packed. However, it was still full of visual impact, especially when those battleships were sealed. There was no signal or aura leaking out, just like a coffin. While she gazed at the scenes on the light screen through the ice, her eyebrows furrowed slightly. Her conjecture in the spatial channel had all been confirmed. The central computer had indeed been controlled by Zhao Liu. As for how she had done it, the silly voice talking to Jing Jio had explained everything. The true spirit of the heavenly treasure in Chaotian and the machine intelligence were indeed of the same origin. That was why it could replace her. Hua Shi pulled back her gaze and interrupted the boring and silly conversation, asking, "Are you sure you can leave on this battleship?" No sooner had she said this than the ear-piercing alarm rang out on the battleship. It meant that the long-range detection system had discovered that the battleship was locked on by a powerful weapon, and it was possible that the attack of the enemy had already arrived. "Oops, I've missed something." The speed of the battleship is almost zero after leaving the spatial channel, and it needs a long time to accelerate. It's easy to be attacked during this process. Those immortals of the previous generations, how could they have ion cannons? How could they be used? Qing's panicked voice echoed in the battleship. She didn't know how to deal with the current situation. The light screen had already detected the source of the danger. It was an expressionless middle-aged general with a grave expression on his face. The black overcoat on his body hung down naturally in the windless space. There was a small base of a plasma cannon in front of him. Two devil immortals in black clothing were further behind, holding a few magic treasures in their hands, emitting a faint glow. This was a formation that looked simple, but was actually quite ingenious. The base of the plasma cannon was in the center of the formation, and it had already been activated. Using a formation to activate the plasma cannon was a continuation of General Li's line of thought and philosophy. Looking at the image on the light screen, Jing Jio had a puzzled and curious look in his eyes. He didn't remember who Chunya was, nor did he know that the plasma cannon was the dreadful weapon that had beheaded the Scorching Sun battleship years ago. All he felt was that he had seen this scene in the movie theater of Foggy City, and Master Eve had accompanied him back then. On the screen, a fog-like object appeared in front of the plasma cannon. It was a sign that the launch had been completed. Jing Jio didn't know any of this. He looked at the image on the light screen curiously. The next moment, he found himself on the light screen, or more precisely, in space. The snow girl led him and Hua Shi, who was encased in ice, out of the battleship. The three of them were floating in front of the battleship. The beams of light formed by the plasma cannon illuminated the battleships in the dark space, turning the whole world into a graveyard. How could they resist the plasma cannon that could melt alloys? If the snow girl chose to evade, the battleship behind her would be destroyed. The tens of thousands of evacuees in the battleship who were slowly waking up would all die. It was shameful, but it was useful. Why would she care if Chunya didn't care? It was true that the snow girl didn't care about the lives of humans, but she cared that someone was trying to challenge her supreme position, just like when the full moon planet was facing the 9 black suns. As a result, she didn't choose to evade. She grabbed Jingjiu's hand and swung it forward. It was like waving a wooden stick to hit a stone thrown at her from the opposite side. It was like how Jingjiu had smashed Gu Qing's sword into the cliff by the sword-washing stream with the iron sword that looked like a fire stick many years ago. Even though it was a powerful plasma cannon that was approaching at the speed of light, she still hit it accurately. To be more precise, the beam of the plasma cannon was blocked by Jingjiu's compact and smooth body. There was no sound or explosion. The plasma beam was blocked and returned to the other side of the universe at an absolutely precise angle. The base of the plasma cannon disintegrated at a speed visible to the naked eye and then dissipated. Soon after, the plasma cannon fell on the formation. The formation melted in an instant, which served as a barrier for Chunya. The terrifying power penetrated the formation and fell into the void. Chunya suffered some minor injuries. The immortal blood on his cloak turned into a fireball. The 2 demon immortals in black were directly thrown thousands of kilometers away. Their faces were pale, and they were shocked speechless. The other 3 immortals who were ready to attack subconsciously stopped. What was going on? Even if Jingjiu could block the laser cannon, how could he block the plasma cannon? They quickly understood. It was the all-in-one sword that Her Majesty the Queen was holding. Looking at the entire universe and the history of human civilization, was there a more powerful combination than this? So that's how the 9 virgins on planet Moongazer died. The essence of the universe was darkness. The light emitted by the countless stars in the distance was like a cup of water, passing through just like that, leaving no radiance behind. The space transfer station outside the gray passage had been closed. One could faintly hear the staff inside smashing the wall. More than 1,000 battleships hovered in the darkness in silence like coffins. Your Majesty, we've always respected you in Chaotian. I believe you know that we don't have and don't want to have any malicious intent toward you. We have never thought of controlling you. Now that you are not threatened by anything, please enjoy your time in this universe freely. As for the affairs of the humans, I hope you can let us handle them ourselves. Chunya said this gravely while looking at the white dot in the distance. The 2 demon immortals in black and the other 3 immortals flew behind him, expressing their support for what he said by remaining silent. There was no medium in the universe, but it was not difficult for a ferryman like Chunya to make sound. Hearing the sound in the distance, the expression in the snow girl's eyes didn't change. She flew in that direction with her 2 small hands behind her back. Jingjiu and Hua Shi in the ice block were guided by an invisible force, following her at a moderate distance. The huge battleship hovered in the same spot. The distance between them grew shorter. Even in such a vast and empty universe, the atmosphere was getting more and more intense. The ascended immortals were all-powerful swordsmen, and they were no less powerful than the secret agents who had appeared on the moon-gazing planet. Even though the battleships had turned into coffins, they were still equipped with the most advanced weapons of the Federation of the Milky Way and had more preparations. The Snow Girl had been in a state of exhaustion after killing the 9 secret agents, and she felt a bit weak. Could she kill 6 more of them that day? The immortals spread out, forming a formation vaguely. This formation was much more powerful than the one used to activate the base of the plasma cannon. It exuded a pure energy, as if it would materialize out of thin air in the dark universe. Chunya stood on the same spot where the center of the formation was located. The stone pestle had been retrieved a long time ago. He picked up the other end of the green rope with his right hand and fixed his gaze on Jing Jio behind the snow girl. He pulled the rope with all his might. Jing Jio could sense the cold yet hot, emotionless yet eager gaze, but he didn't know why. After a long while, the snow girl flew to the front of the large formation formed by the immortals, and then made a strange gesture. Her body leaned back slightly, as if she were about to fall down. Chunya and the other immortals were nervous and confused, wondering what she was doing. Huashi snorted in the ice cube. Only she understood what the snow girl meant. There was no north, south, east, or west in the universe, and there was no up and down. The snow girl leaned back, looking down at the immortals. She looked down at the immortals and uttered a cry. Hearing this cry, Chunya and the other immortals activated their fairy energy and prepared to launch the most powerful attack, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Jing Jio reached out his hand and held the luggage floating in the space tightly to his chest. Huashi frowned slightly. She held the ice wall with her hand and adjusted her posture to ensure that she wouldn't bump into the wall too painfully. A moment later, the snow girl and Jing Jio suddenly disappeared from the original spot. The ice cube also disappeared with them. A straight white line appeared in the dark universe. Chapter 983. Chunya turned around as fast as he could, watching as the white line passed through more than 1,000 warships and disappeared into the other side of the universe. By the time the other immortals reacted and looked in that direction, they could only see the remnants of the white line. They were silent, unable to dispel the shock in their hearts for a long time. What kind of speed was that? And Her Majesty actually escaped? One of the immortals couldn't hold back his strong confusion and asked, wouldn't the humans in the ice be turned into dust? No matter how fast Her Majesty could fly, how far could she go without a nuclear furnace? Aren't they afraid of getting lost in the deep space? Chunya said expressionlessly, she doesn't need energy and she doesn't need to get close to the celestial bodies. Negative entropy is just a hypothesis or even an illusion. Could it be real? A black-clothed, immortal demonic beast said with a trembling voice. If that's the case, then she only needs to stay in the universe to become stronger and stronger. How could humans escape from a rule? Chunya didn't answer this question because he couldn't. The outer space outside the gray passage was extremely quiet. Not a single sound could be heard from the more than 1,000 warships and the lonely transfer station. These warships and the 6 immortals were all here to kill the Queen of Snowy Kingdom and capture Jingjio. No matter how one thought about it, this should be a magnificent and tragic battle. But who knew that it would end so suddenly in nothingness? It was like stepping on empty air, like walking to the end of the path only to return to the beginning. It was like reading a story only to find that the hero woke up to find that it was just a dream. No one liked this feeling. This feeling of nothingness was very uncomfortable. As the people involved, it was even easier for them to develop extreme self-loathing. The immortals looked at each other and understood each other's feelings. The black-clothed, immortal demonic beast mumbled, "Do you think Her Majesty will think that we are all fools when she sees our formation?" A female immortal in purple said with a slightly confused expression, "We are fools to begin with." The black-clothed, immortal demonic beast sighed emotionally. When humans think, God laughs. The ancients were not deceiving us. The other black-clothed, immortal demonic beast had been cultivating with him for thousands of years and knew that he had such a sentimental temperament, so he sighed helplessly. If there really is a God, she won't laugh at our thinking. She will only think that we are bored and ignore us. Chunya said expressionlessly, just like her. The immortals were silent for a long time as they thought about the white line that had casually left. What do you do next? Someone asked. Chunya tied the green rope to his wrist and made a simple flower. He said, "We must find her." The pessimistic demonic immortal in black said, "The universe is so vast, and she doesn't need the fairy aura. How could she find her?" Chunya made sure that the end of the rope was tied tightly and loosened the remaining 2 fingers on his right hand. No matter how weak she is now or where she will go to heal, they will still have to go to the homeworld. We will just wait there. The ancestral planet was on the other side of the Hyene Nebula. It was extremely far away from here, and one would have to pass through several space tunnels in between. When they left the battleship, they all brought nuclear power furnaces with them, which could provide an endless source of energy. But how could they pass through those spatial passages? An immortal said, "Why don't we try driving a warship? Maybe the self-destruction rule is just a bluff? There's no need to try. If we can't find the awakening signal, then no one will be able to open those warships," someone said. "What should we do next? Are we just going to stay here?" The pessimistic, demonic immortal in black said. Ascenders were indeed powerful. To normal humans, they were no different from deities. In fact, on their own planets, they often played the role of gods, deities, and Buddhas. However, any greatness in the vast universe would be like ink falling into the sea. It would be quickly diluted. Without the transcendence of modern civilization, gods, deities, and Buddhas would only be the local overlords of that planet. Immortals without warships were like Lucii without a sword. They could not go far. First, we need to find the awakening signal. The central computer is already controlled by those brats. How are you going to get it? What's going on over at the main planet? Cheng Shuang is staying there to keep an eye on Zhao Liu and the planetary defense system. I told you that you are not vigilant enough against that cat demon. Think about how many disasters those ancient divine beasts have brought. Chunya gestured for them to stop talking nonsense. He looked at the transfer station not far away and said, "Civilian low-speed spaceships should not have the self-destruction clause. Let's go there and see if we can contact anyone." Wow, those people have cannons. That was close. It's okay. The snow girl has been taken care of. Yeah, why did they leave? That's right. It's easy to be targeted if they stay in the warship. What should we do if Chunya and the others go to the transfer station? Zhao Liu sat by the hot spring and looked at the light screen in the fog. Listening to Qing Er's nagging, her eyebrows were about to fly up. She finally controlled her emotions and asked, "Have you found the method I asked you to find?" "No. Logically speaking, it should be some special program that controls the snow girl, but there is no trace of it in the database." Qing said with some embarrassment. "Also, I haven't found a way to bypass the physical operation authorization." Zhao Liu looked around and said expressionlessly, "Find a physical operation authorization as soon as possible." She was obviously lying when she was in the mecha. The method to control the snow girl can be a little slower, but it still needs to be in our hands. Lying by her side, Ada gazed at the sky above the mountains through the fog. He was unusually quiet and obedient. It was because he was too tired today. It was not something an ordinary cat could do to crush the gravitational field. After the gravitational field was broken, the mountains, the lake, and the hot spring were all exposed to the outside world. The people of this world would arrive soon. Zhao Liu wanted Qing to find a physical operation authorization as soon as possible in order to solve the following problems. A light transport spacecraft appeared in the atmosphere in the distance as the violent wind blew up the remaining snow. In the next moment, hundreds of armed mechas of various types arrived among the mountains. Many splashing sounds could be heard on the surface of the lake. It was unclear how many swordsmen of the Praying Hall and the elite soldiers of the military were on their way here. Zhao Liu had no intention of leaving. She reached out her hand and stroked Ada to soothe his anxiety, in case too many people would die later. It didn't take long before the military and the Praying Hall completed the encirclement of the hot spring and the buildings. Ran Donglu and a few high-ranking officials of the government pushed open the door and walked to the opposite side of the hot spring. The reaction of the Praying Hall was much more intense. A few cardinal preachers and the candidate priests flew to the top of the hot spring and yelled from above, "Where is that person? What have you done?" Hundreds of mechas in the sky raised their mechanical arms and aimed at the edge of the hot spring with all kinds of weapons. A young woman was still sitting by the edge of the hot spring, but she was no longer that person. Ada glanced at the hot spring in bewilderment. wondering if that person was at the bottom of the water and they wanted to fish her out and dry her before assembling her. Ran Donglu raised his hand to signal for everybody to be quiet. He said to Zhao, "I've pretended to be deaf and dumb since I learned about the existence of the cocoon breakers many years ago, until I received the decree from that person. It's because we humans who have been living among the stars don't want to know the truth. We can live in peace with you people, and it doesn't matter if we are led in secret. And this situation has been going on for many years. I believe that my family and I have shown you enough respect during this period of time. Why do you want to break the peace then?" Zhao Liu said calmly to him, "I need your civilization." Jing Jiao had said something similar. The reason was different, but the request was the same. However, Jing Jiao intended to inherit the human civilization through the approval of that young woman at the time, but Zhao Liu wanted to seize this civilization more directly. It was then that another spaceship landed from the sky. The light battleship and the thousands of mechas in the mountains didn't fire. It was because Ran Donglu didn't give the order, and everybody could see clearly that the spaceship belonged to the Ran family. Ran Handong, Zhong Lizi, and Jiang Yuxiao walked out from the spaceship and stood behind Zhao Liu. The main preachers and priests had a slight change of expression on their faces. They looked at Ran Donglu reflexively in an attempt to figure out why. Zhao Liu stood up while holding Ada in her arms. "Surrender. I don't want to kill all of you," she said while looking at the people on the other side of the hot spring. After a moment of silence, Ran Donglu said, "The reason our priest sect could survive until now and cooperate with those cocoon breakers is not entirely because of our self-control, but also because we have a modern technological civilization. The human battleships are powerful enough to flatten this planet. Even if you killed us, it would be meaningless. I think you don't want to see the end of the world like that. Those scenes won't happen. It's because all the battleships are under my control," said Zhao Liu. Upon hearing this, the priests and main preachers didn't believe it. It was as if they were looking at a crazy person. The two generals by Ran Donglu's side had a terrible look on their faces. It was because they had confirmed not long ago that they had lost contact with the battleships of the three major fleets and the guarding fleets of the various galaxies, and they were nowhere to be found on the star maps and positioning systems, as if they had vanished into thin air. The main planet of the Federation of the Milky Way had experienced too many events that day. First of all, the sudden explosions and attacks had caused the light rays outside the atmosphere to be exceedingly complicated, even more so than the bright permanent star. Then, about 10% of the populace saw the white cat descending from the sky with their own eyes. Later, everybody saw the white cat through the TV news, the internet, and various other methods. Then, they heard the thunder coming from the distant north and felt the quaking of the earth. The whole planet was plunged into chaos as a result. The populace ran and screamed as they left the buildings, fleeing toward the underground fortifications. The satellites and the space stations outside the atmosphere were in darkness for a short while, and then everything went back to normal. Under the command of the central computer, the chaos was still under control. The populace who had fled to the underground fortifications were gathered in various evacuation halls, and the populace who hadn't had time to leave returned to their homes according to the instructions on their wristbands. During this process, many people noticed some very strange things. For example, some automatic equipment suddenly became disobedient, some robots suddenly stopped what they were doing, and some self-heating coffee machines refused to put sugar in them. But the strangest thing was, of course, that all the news channels, online forums, and virtual communities all turned into the same image at a certain moment. The group of mountains looked so magnificent and beautiful, but why did they look so strange? They had never seen them in the geography classes or in the sightseeing films. Where was the city behind the lake? Why did it exude a sense of retro style? And did those cars use the bio-oil? Why were the buildings behind the hot spring so beautiful? Why were the mechas of the military everywhere? What were those important figures of the praying hall doing? The scenes had gradually spread from the main planet to the other parts of the planet, occupying the TV sets of all the households, and all the online forums and virtual communities displayed the same scene. eliciting many surprise screams and conjectures. In the distant Stargate base in Show Earth City, the permission to lock down the Stargate Resort Hotel was revoked. The populace in the underground neighborhood let out the loudest screams. It was because they saw the familiar-looking girl with short hair and Zone Lizzie behind her. The whole Federation of the Milky Way saw the scene by the hot spring and a short-haired girl holding the white cat. The populace on the main planet had just experienced a terrifying and exciting experience that day, so they recognized the white cat as soon as they saw it. That's the cat. It's a devil. How come it has become so small? Is it a monster of the sea of dark matter? If the white cat with long hair was the devil descending from the sky, who was the short-haired girl holding the devil? I know her. In the assembly point of the Luoyun station of the second subway line of Capital City, the crowd was too nervous to utter a word while looking at the light screen. All of a sudden, the surprised and bewildered voice of a youth burst out in the crowd. In the next moment, a few more voices burst out in the assembly points and apartment buildings in Capital City. Those young men and women who were unwilling to put down the hoverboards even if they had to flee for their lives, looked at Zhao Liu on the screen and thought of the scenes on the square on the street in front of the building of the military headquarters that night. They felt an indescribable sense of pride in addition to feeling shocked. It was then that Zhao Liu heard the proud voice of Qing. She said to Ran Donglu, "I can say that the whole world is under my control now." What she had said earlier was that all the battleships of the Federation of the Milky Way were under her control, but the scope of her control extended to the whole world. The world referred to all the objects and relationships in the world. Nobody believed what she said. Ran Donglu furrowed his brows as well. Zhao Liu looked at the mechas in the sky. Those mechas dropped down like raindrops. End of this chapter. Chapter 984. Bam, bam, bam. Countless heavy crashing sounds could be heard from the mountains and the lakeside. The mechas lost all their propulsion. Some of them fell off the cliffs, and some fell into the lake, creating a great splash. The scene became chaotic. The life-saving devices were activated, and the swordsmen of the military and the praying hall climbed out of the mechas. Fortunately, they were not wounded too severely. The eerie scene was witnessed by the crowd, and it was also shown on all the TV screens in the Federation of the Milky Way. "Look, I can do it." Zhao Liu pulled back her gaze and said to Ran Donglu, "Those battleships are like coffins now. Though the life-saving system can last a long time, nobody can guarantee that the humans on the battleships won't have any problems under such pressure. Maybe some of them will collapse, and some of them will try to take over the command of the captain and open the battleships from the inside." Ran Donglu remained silent. If the battleships in a state of absolute silence were opened forcibly, they would explode themselves. If more than 100,000 battleships exploded into space one by one, how magnificent would it be? The resources and wisdom accumulated over the years since the rebirth of the human civilization would be destroyed in a day. Nobody could bear such a responsibility. The two military generals, many swordsmen of the military and the praying hall, and some main preachers and priests all fell silent like Ran Donglu. The cardinal in red suddenly exclaimed sternly, "This is all a deception. You're not a god. It's impossible. If Jing Jiu can't become the new god, I'll do it." Before he could finish his words, Zhao Liu said to the main preacher expressionlessly, "The two backup systems have been shut down, and only the main system of that planet is under my control. That one has already perished. Are you sure you want to be buried with her?" Most of the people present couldn't understand what she meant, but the cardinal in red and Ran Donglu vaguely knew the truth. The expression on Ran Donglu's face grew graver, and the expression on the cardinal in red's face grew crazier, yelling, "I don't believe it." Having said that, he dashed toward the hot spring. Then he flew out. He was like a stone that fell into a courtyard in the distance and died there. The surprise screams broke out again, but it didn't cause a greater commotion, and nobody took advantage of the chaos to attack. Because the one who killed the cardinal was not Zhao Liu. Ran Donglu withdrew his right hand, looked at Zhao Liu, and said solemnly, I pledge allegiance to you on behalf of the administrative main planet. Though he was an important figure in the Federation of the Milky Way, he could only represent the main planet, not the other administrative regions. When the three major fleets were frozen in space, it was meaningless for him to represent the military. But that was enough. Zhao Liu raised her right hand and gestured for Qing to turn off the live broadcast. On the other side of the distant gray passage, a large hole had appeared on the surface of the lonely transit base. It looked like the sealed door had been torn open by some powerful force. More than 10 staff members of the transit base were quarantined in the living area, their faces pale with fright. The backup life support system had been activated, so they did not need to worry about dying immediately. However, what kind of monsters were those people? Chunya and the other immortals stood in the empty hall, watching the television screen in silence. Earlier, as Zhao Liu took a look at the sky, those mechas fell down one after another. Now the television screen had disappeared, and the program had returned to normal or the expressions on the faces of the broadcasters. Chunya said in the communication system, "Hello, spirit of the green sky mirror. I'd like to talk to the immortal Liu." After a moment of silence in the communication system, Qing Er's timid voice rang out. You wait a moment. I don't know if she will answer the call." It didn't take long before the voice of Zhao Liu appeared in the communication system. "Do you people want to surrender?" Chunya said expressionlessly. "You can destroy the three major fleets and kill all the humans, but you can't kill us. I'm not Taiping Jinren, unless it's absolutely necessary." Zhao Liu's voice was devoid of any emotion. "As for you people, you're no longer a threat to me, so I have no need to negotiate with you." Chunya said, "I think you lack respect and understanding of the seniors like us. You people have ascended and left Chaotian, so you are of course very powerful. The problem is that you people don't have any battleships right now, so you have no choice but to find a space station or a planet to live on. You're like a farmer without a horse. You can't even climb over a mountain in front of you." Zhao Liu continued, "You people came to this world earlier than me, but you still don't know what the biggest problem in this world is until now." The pessimistic devil man in black couldn't help but ask, "What is it?" "It's the distance." Zhao Liu exited the conversation after saying this. All the battleships and flying devices in the Federation of the Milky Way, as long as they were in the network of the Charter, had turned into coffins or rocks, staying in various places of the universe lifelessly, waiting anxiously to be awakened or to die. One battleship was an exception, which was the Scorching Sun battleship. Lu Shui didn't contact Zhao Liu directly. Instead, he entered the game as usual and notified her. The monkeys on the Shinma Peak were screaming, and the clouds were drifting over at the foot of the cliff. Zhao Liu walked out from the manor cave. "Is she safe?" Lu Shui asked as soon as he saw her. Zhao Liu was aware that he was not concerned about her, but about the soldiers and populace on those battleships and flying devices. Ran Handong has installed a backdoor in the program. "Even if there is no awakening signal, she will be safe," she said. Lu Shui couldn't believe what she said, saying, "The huge battleship outside the passage of Jia Lei has more than 70,000 evacuees on board, as well as other civilian flying devices. I hope you can lift the ban as soon as possible. It's best if not too many people die." Zhao Liu was fully aware that she would be nagged to death if she didn't agree to his request. "Okay," she said without hesitation. The expression on Lu Shui's face grew gentler as he said, "Send my regards to Ada and Qing." "I haven't received any news from Tong Yin," Zhao Liu said. Lu Shui said, "Then I have no choice but to do it myself. I'm too far away from here. I'll try to take care of it first." By the time the Snow Girl and Jing Jiu came out from the passage of Jia Lei, the Scorching Sun battleship had already turned around, heading toward a distant sun. After a moment of silence, Zhao Liu said maybe he would prefer to take care of it himself. "He is an idiot now," said Lu Shui. Zhao Liu let out a rare smile, reminding him the planetary defense system of the ancestral planet is very strong. You should be careful. They were all aware that Jingjiu was in a bad situation. To solve this problem, they had to kill the great grandmaster of Aoyama. The Snow Girl and Jingjio would definitely go there as well. The ancestral planet was the place where the final answer lay. In the Federation of the Milky Way, the existence and specific location of the ancestral planet had always been a secret. However, it was no longer a secret to them because of the existence of Tong Yen. Lu Shui walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the peaks above the ocean of clouds, the expression in his eyes suddenly changing. Qingrong Peak was not far away, and Shuriwa Peak and Shilai Peak were joined together in the distance. The Shangda Peak in the game hadn't leveled out yet, and the Hermit Peaks were still there. Tingguang Peak was still as high as before. The peaks of Aoyama and everything in between them originated from the great grandmaster of Aoyama. He was the highest peak in Aoyama. Jingjio might have surpassed his height, but he was forced to the point where he couldn't wake up. Could they, the younger generation, defeat this peak? Hundreds of armed mechas were scattered in the mountains and lakes, unable to be activated, turning into a pile of scrap metal. The sporadic gunshots and laser beams pierced through the forest, but they soon died down. The armed guards of the praying hall were dismantled gradually, and the hot spring regained its tranquility. Ran Donglu and two military generals walked over. Seeing the scene, the main preachers, priests, and regular soldiers were shocked beyond words. Even Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxia found it hard to believe that Ran Donglu's attitude and stance had changed so abruptly that it was hard for them to imagine. Was it possible that all the important figures were decisive fence-sitters? The situation was under control. Zhao Leu didn't say anything to Ran Donglu. She walked to the back of the building while holding the cat. Ran Handong arched her eyebrows at her father and followed her hastily. Ran Donglu let out a faint smile, his eyes full of affection. Seeing this, Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxia felt even more baffled. The silvery, streamlined spaceship rose up from the back of the building, heading toward Capital City after breaking through the remaining snow in the sky. Countless ripples formed on the surface of the hot spring, resembling the mood of the people at the moment, and then the ripples subsided. The remaining snow after the collapse of the gravitational field landed on the windows of the spaceship, making "pa" sounds like the rainstorm on a summer night. Ran Handong turned on the sound barrier and brought out the information in her bracelet, reporting, "The joint conference will begin in 20 minutes. The key is how to deal with those battleships. It's impossible to keep them locked into space forever." She was a competent secretary or advisor in every aspect, regardless of whether she treated Jingjio or Zhao Leu. Zhao Leu said, "The time is too short, and the people on the battleships are not fearful enough. Let's wait until the conference is over." Ran Handong nodded and asked, "Do you need to see the information of the participants of the joint conference?" Zhao Leu said, "It's just a routine notice. The conference itself is of no significance." Though Ran Handong didn't agree with Zhao Leu's suggestion, she couldn't convince Zhao Leu. Thinking of the unexpected event that day, she couldn't help but ask, "How did you know that person has left here?" Only when that person had left would Zhao Leu have a chance to isolate the main planet and obtain the control of the central computer. But how did she know that? How could she grasp the timing so accurately? Zhao Leu said, "It's because Jingjio has shown up." Ran Handong didn't fully understand the logic of this statement, but Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxia understood what Zhao Leu meant. It was because the two of them knew Jingjio's temperament and behavior better than Zhao Leu did. Zhao Leu didn't need to know the exact situation of that girl. As long as she saw Jingjio, she knew it was time to strike back. If they weren't confident that they could isolate the girl from the central computer and the charter network, Jingjio wouldn't dare show up in front of the world given his cautious and cowardly behavior. This cooperation was not planned in advance. The tacit understanding between them was indeed amazing. Zhao Leu and Jingjio hadn't seen each other for more than 500 years, and they had never fought side by side. However, the tacit understanding between the two of them was better than the tacit understanding between them and Lu Shui and Tong Yen. This was probably the so-called telepathy The spaceship had already flown out of the mountains in the north and arrived in a sunny world. Ran Handong opened the protective screen. The bright blue sky and the bright sunlight shone in through the window and shone on Zhao Leiu's face. Her seemingly ordinary and elegant face, under the illumination of the light, faintly exuded a sense of holiness. Ran Handong was taken aback for a moment before she pressed, "Why did you broadcast the news live then?" The populace of the Federation of the Milky Way had all witnessed the scenes of the mechas falling down like the raindrops, the indignant expressions on the faces of the main preachers and priests of the praying hall, and the fresh blood. This might serve as a show of power, but for the vast majority of humans, the deaths and conflicts in the distance were hardly frightening. On the contrary, they were more likely to be excited, because they were safe. This is not a message to them. Zhao Leiu's answer was still concise. Regardless of what they were doing, it was important to communicate information quickly and smoothly. In doing so, they wouldn't make a wrong judgment and cause problems in the cooperation. The game, The Path Toward Heaven, had such a function. In comparison to Jing Jiu's steady style of doing things, Zhao Leiu's method was simpler and more direct, or in other words, more brutal. All she needed was a live broadcast of the news to send the message to every corner of the Federation of the Milky Way. No matter where the Snow Girl and Jing Jiu went, they would surely see the news and know that she had already controlled the central computer in this world. On the other hand, she hoped that Tong Yin, who had disappeared for some reason, would also see the news and not do anything devious or crazy when she knew the victory was close at hand. Ding! Ran Handong received a message. She uttered a few times before saying, "Okay, father." She said to Zhao Leiu, "I have obtained the physical keys of a few experimental bases. My big brother has taken control of the fourth backup." Zhao Leiu uttered, Zhong Lizi had felt that something was amiss. Hearing this conversation, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "Has your family always been on our side?" "Of course," said Ran Handong with a faint smile. Zhong Lizi exclaimed in surprise. Grandmaster Ran's pain and reluctance in the beginning were all feigned. "I didn't expect my father to be so good at acting," said Ran Handong with a smile. Jiang Yuxiao remarked sentimentally, "It looks like my uncle is right. The politicians are all experienced actors." The 2 layers of protective shields on the main planet had been greatly affected by the dancing laser beams and particle beams, the sudden explosion, and the white devil cat falling down from the sky. It wasn't until now that they had started to repair themselves. The concentrated stars and the rays of the sun of the solar system shone on the surface of the planet more than usual. In less than 20 minutes, the average temperature of the northern hemisphere facing the sun had increased by 1 degree Celsius in this season. If the situation continued, the humans could still rely on the thermostatic equipment to live, but the animals in the field would have a hard time. The glaciers in the north would melt faster, and the housing prices in the cities along the coast would deteriorate faster than the glaciers. The light from the stars illuminated the space stations and satellites outside the atmosphere. Those space stations and satellites were all locked, looking like the space tombstones erected by the military for the heroes. The surface of the buildings in Capital City was illuminated by the bright light. However, the empty streets had nothing to do with the dazzling light and the hot weather. It was because the authorities on the main planet had issued the strictest martial law. The silvery spaceship flew over the small square and garden in the street, where Zhao Leiu often played with the hoverboard. That day, no one could see the enthusiastic followers of Shun Yunmai, the ancient dresses, or the cheerful laughter of the young men and women. The only thing that could be seen were the wilted flowers, their heads lowered listlessly. In the distance in front of the square in the middle of the street stood an irregular, huge building. It was the military building of the Federation of the Milky Way. Chapter 985. Ignoring all the rules and prohibitions, the silvery spaceship parked on the protruding platform in front of the building of the military headquarters. Of course, it had already violated many prohibitions, such as the ban on flying. Dozens of laser platforms moved at a high speed along with the cracking sounds, aiming at the spaceship automatically. The generating device of the gravitational field was hidden in the alloy wall, emitting a faint blue glow. It could isolate the spaceship from all directions at any time. The building of the military headquarters was severely damaged after the fierce battle between Jingjiu and Shinyinmai. The heavy weapons system and the cutting system of the gravitational field were installed many times more powerful than before, probably taking the damage into consideration during the repair process. The footsteps rang out like raindrops. It was unclear how many soldiers were passing through the building. Zhao Lei didn't pay any attention to them. She entered the building with Ada in her arms and the three girls. The laser guns were soundless, and the electromagnetic guns had the faint buzzing of wild bees when they accelerated. The same was true for the gravitational field. Yet, none of the weapon platforms had fired, and the generating device of the gravitational field hadn't been activated. The soldiers with weapons stood in the corridors of the building of the military headquarters and by the covered bridges at high or low places. Looking at the girl with short hair walking in, they didn't dare aim at her, to say nothing of shooting at her. It was unclear if the sword wills in the building had crushed their courage from the deep end of their spiritual souls, or the scenes on the TV screen and General Ran Donglo's statement had made them, who were used to obeying orders, so they became silent. The protruding platform in front of the building of the military headquarters was very close to the most important office. The alloy door opened soundlessly. Zhao Liu walked in while holding Ada in her arms. She saw a black muzzle of a gun in front of her. A middle-aged female officer held a pistol, aimed it between her eyebrows, and pulled the trigger neatly. Bang! A gunshot rang out. She's Lieutenant Colonel Chun, the personal secretary of General Li. She's been working here all this time. Ran Handong explained. She uses an old-fashioned gunpowder gun without the chip. As such, she can't detect it in advance and control it. Zhao Liu didn't say anything. She reached out her hand and grabbed the stationary bullet from the air. Do you have a death wish? She asked Lieutenant Colonel Chun. Do you have a death wish? This was neither a threat nor a mantra of the Aoyama sect. It was a genuine question. Lieutenant Colonel Chun looked at the bullet between her fingers, his face pale. The bullet had been deformed by the powerful sword intent, like a flattened copper pea. Her courage and loyalty to the organization were crushed along with this bullet. Her arm, which was still holding the pistol, began to tremble more and more violently. Just before Zhao Liu lost her patience, she put down the gun, lowered her head, and said, "No, make a pot of tea." Zhao Liu walked past her and went into the office. "Make it light." Ran Handong, Zhong Lizi, and Jiang Yusha didn't dare make a sound. They walked past Colonel Chun in silence. It didn't take long before a pot of light tea was sent to General Li's former office, along with many secret materials of the military of the Federation of the Milky Way. The evaluation of the officers by the Internal Affairs Department was not recorded in the central computer. Ran Handong took over the work of the secretary and sat on one side of the desk. Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yusha began to follow Zhao Liu's request and chose the suitable candidate from the list of officers as quickly as possible. Ding! Dozens of light screens and a few holographic projections appeared in the spacious office. The administrators, priests, and the commanders of the garrisons of various galaxies, independent planets, and important mining areas of the Federation of the Milky Way were shown on the light screens. The joint meeting had begun. Before Zhao Liu could speak, a gray-haired female priest started to attack. She said icily while staring into Zhao Liu's eyes from a distance of a few thousand light years, "Anyone who blasphemes the god will fall into the abyss and never be free from it." Zhao Liu turned off the light screen of this female priest without hesitation and kicked her out of the meeting. The administrator of the sector leaned forward slightly and said tersely, "I don't care who you are or why General Ran supports you, but you have to release the people in the praying hall on the main planet and the brave soldiers on those battleships immediately. Nobody deserves to be tortured by a wicked person like you." Countless populace in the Federation of the Milky Way had seen the scene by the hot spring. including these officials and priests. Ran Donglu was also on the light screen of the joint meeting. The traces of blood and battles could be vaguely seen behind him. "We're loyal to our belief. We won't surrender," said another female priest in a low voice. Zhao Lei didn't give a response. She looked at the light screen closest to her. On the light screen, she could see the green prairie and a magnificent building that looked like a pagoda. The administrators and priests of various galaxies recognized it as the famous praying hall of the Stargate. Dozens of floating cars flew up from the bottom of the cliff and landed in the square in front of the praying hall. The chief master of the Xia clan, the main preacher Tai Yang, and the others who had been imprisoned for many days walked out of the cars and looked up at the long stone steps. Along with the faint footsteps, the female priest of the Stargate walked out from the praying hall and came before the crowd. The expression in her eyes was as tranquil as usual, though she looked a bit haggard. It was evident that she had been under house arrest for many days. Looking at the light screens outside the stone steps, the female priest of the Stargate nodded slightly to greet her colleagues and the unfamiliar officials. Then she turned to Zhao Lei and bowed slowly, saying in a calm and respectful tone, "Greetings, godly commissioner." Zhao Lei said, "I have something more important to deal with. I'll leave the rest to you." The female priest of the Stargate responded in a low voice. Seeing the scene and listening to the conversation, the priests and administrators on the light screen of the joint meeting were extremely shocked. The female priest of the Stargate had the highest status and was the most respected priest, save for the one on the main planet. Why did she show so much respect to that short-haired demon girl? And what did the godly commissioner mean? The one on the main planet used to be the executor of the will of God. But when the successor in the prophecy of God appeared, she didn't want to hand over the power due to her greed for power. She even tried to harm the new god. "If you insist on standing on the opposite side, it's a blasphemy." The calm voice of the female priest of the Stargate rang out on the light screen while traveling among the planets. Zhao Lei turned off the light screen. It seemed that this joint meeting would decide the fate of the Federation of the Milky Way, but she had only participated in it for 5 minutes. In fact, she wouldn't have convened this joint meeting if it weren't for Liu Shisui's request. A moment ago, most of the civilian spacecraft had returned to the nearest planets or space docks according to the order of the central computer, and they were warned not to take off again before obtaining the permission. She had told Qinya and the other ferrymen in the distant transit station on the Jialei Passage that distance was the most important factor in this universe. As long as the battleships and the spacecrafts couldn't travel freely, the Federation of the Milky Way would be divided into countless isolated islands. Even the chief administrative officer, priestess, or even immortals of your planet are just island masters. When you couldn't influence the other parts of this world, you would be exiled from this world. In a sense, what she was doing to the Federation of the Milky Way was similar to what Jingzhou had done to her over the past year, which was to slow down the speed of the entire structure. In other words, she was lowering the intelligence. The light screen in the office disappeared. The tea in the teacup was still warm. Ran Handong came over and nodded, saying, "I've got all the data and programs in the lab of the base." Zhao Lei said. She said that she and the Great Grandmaster were comrades in arms. It looks like the Great Grandmaster has never trusted her completely. Ada lifted his head on her knee and meowed weakly to express his agreement. Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxia had also finished what they were doing. They handed in the list of names they had selected unconfidently. Zhao Lei took a sip of the tea. Hundreds of light screens the size of frames appeared in the office again. Those light screens were showing the scenes inside the battleships. It meant that hundreds of battleships had been woken up by the central computer and returned to the real world. The captains of the battleships stood in front of the light screens with different expressions on their faces, and some high-ranking officers stood behind them. You will receive the relevant information and reports. In short, you can consider this as a coup d'etat. Zhao Lei set down the teacup and said to the people in the light screens, "You have 9 minutes to think about it. Surrender or die forever." It didn't take 9 minutes for the captains of the battleships to express their refusal calmly. They were all brave enough to die. Ran Handong shot a glance at Zhao Liu and knew that she didn't have the patience to deal with these affairs. She took over Zhao Liu's work and said, I know most of you have the mental imprint, so you are not the targets. The names selected by Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxiao were displayed on the light screens on the battleships. As the names were displayed, hundreds of battleships experienced chaos of varying degrees. Ran Handong said to the selected vice captains and high-ranking officers, if you are willing to pledge loyalty to the new government, the experimental base will send an unmanned device here in 3 standard days to verify the relevant programs. You have to obey the orders of this woman from then on. Though she said it vaguely, everybody was aware that it was the mental imprint. No need for that, said Zhao Liu. All you have to do is obey the orders of the central computer. Ran Handong was taken aback a bit, thinking that she was too confident. Do the same, said Zhao Liu, as she headed for the outside of the office while holding Ada in her arms. I'm going to take a rest. The silvery spaceship left the platform of the building of the military headquarters, broke through the atmosphere and the protective shield that was in the process of being repaired, and passed through the damaged or closed space stations. It turned into a shooting light and headed toward the permanent star. The main star was close to the center of the galaxy. One could see the bright starry sky no matter where one looked. Billions of stars were beautiful, but even if they were added together, they would not be able to provide more immortal chi than the nearby stars. It didn't take long before the silvery spaceship arrived in a region near the permanent star. Zhao Liu left the battleship and sat in the space with her legs crossed, bathing in the sunlight. She was absorbing the fairy energy in silence. Ada spread his limbs, looking like a flying blanket, hovering over her head. He opened and closed his mouth once in a while, looking like a kitten drinking milk. One of them had swept the whole planet with the all-in-one sword, and the other had broken the gravitational field. They had consumed a great deal of energy. They were extremely tired at the moment and needed a good sleep. Many things had happened in the Federation of the Milky Way, while Zhao Liu and Ada slept facing the sun. Some of them surrendered, and some of them cursed. Many unforeseen events had taken place on those battleships. Like many stories about the sinister nature of human nature, there was nothing so fresh that it needed to be narrated. Fortunately, Qing had controlled it well, so no real tragedy had taken place. It didn't take long for the whole situation to calm down. The populace who had been cursing on TV and on the internet were still angry, but the administrators and female priests of the various galaxies had fallen silent. The female priest of the Stargate, the main preacher of Taiyang, and the others had already set off. They took the high-speed spaceship of the military department of the University of Stargate. This spaceship had obtained the pass issued by the central computer. It would be the only human spaceship in the universe for the next 10 days. This was the most important coup since the recovery of the human civilization, and it was also the fastest one. It was because the initiator of the coup had obtained control of the central computer and found some loopholes to bypass the rules. Another important reason was that the initiator of this coup, Zhao Liu, didn't intend to rule the world. Yet, everybody was aware that it was not over yet. The most important battle in this war that could affect the fate of the human race hadn't taken place yet. Along with the violent wind, the silvery spaceship flew back to the main planet from the other side of the sun and landed on the platform of the building of the military headquarters. Zhao Liu walked out while holding Ada in her arms. The edges of her clothes were a bit burned, and so was the cat hair on Ada's body. They looked a bit embarrassed. It seemed that the travelers in the holy temple of the Wind Snow Mountain were too fond of the warmth of the bonfire. Yet, no hint of tiredness could be seen on her face. She was full of energy and had a fairy aura, her eyes black and white clearly visible. Ada was also looking around in her bosom, feeling proud of himself. He rubbed his head against Zhao Liu's bosom, looking quite naughty. After coming to the office, she took the tea handed to her by Colonel Chun and had a sip. The temperature of the tea was just right, and it was mild enough. She went to the priest manor to pick up her teacher, and Jiang Yuxia went to pick up her uncle, but neither of them were here. There must be a reason for the coincidences in the world. They don't dare see you, said Ran Handong embarrassedly. We didn't accomplish the task, so we only took 40,000 battleships. Even with the help of the central computer and some influential figures in the military, it was still impossible to take over the 3 major fleets in such a short time. Moreover, neither Lu Shui nor Qing wanted to see too many casualties. It's enough, said Zhao Liu. The battleships like the Scorching Sun battleship couldn't even be ranked among the 3 major fleets. Each of the super battleships could deal with a planet. 40,000 battleships were enough to sweep across the universe, not to mention destroying the planetary defense system on the ancestral planet. Zhao Liu set down the teacup and looked at the book on the desk. The book was about the path toward the sky. General Li happened to see the wind blowing over Aoyama when he reread the book, and it came as he wished. He couldn't go back to his office now. As such, the book stayed on that page forever. The paperweight on the book was not a regular one, but an ornament made of 2 blue gems, looking like the wings of a butterfly. Seeing the scene, Ran Handong felt sentimental. Sitting on General Li's chair, Zhao Liu caressed the white cat gently, destroying everything that the blue butterfly represented without batting an eyelid. She looked like a queen. Zhao Liu brought the blue ornament to the side and closed the book, saying, "Let's go." Boom! The building of the military headquarters quaked. A great deal of smoke and dust came out from the underground parking lot and the cracks, but they were soon sucked away by the equipment. The strong wind whistled again. The blue high-temperature flame melted everything in the underground parking lot and sent it to the heat collecting and distributing station in the suburbs dozens of kilometers away through the energy recovery system. It was enough to supply the residents of Capital City with energy for a few years. The white cloud fell down from the window at a high speed. The building left the ground and turned into a huge battleship, heading toward the outside of the atmosphere. The shocked populace came to the streets and looked up at the sky together with the soldiers and policemen who were responsible for maintaining order. Everybody was stunned speechless. In the next moment, they either took off their hats or lowered their heads slightly, thinking that they were saluting. Somewhere in the distant universe, 40,000 battleships had assembled, hovering like stars against the dark background in silence. They were waiting for her arrival. On the last day of the first half of 2020, I finally returned to my home in the Northeast. The lake is still the same lake, and my home is still the same. It's just that it's a bit quieter than before, and the cat doesn't come to greet me anymore. According to the schedule, the cat's hair is flying everywhere at this time of the year. I can't see it anymore. I'll hug Ada in the book more often in the future. Chapter 986. The black battleship silently moved forward in space. The people inside did not know that at this moment, in various parts of the universe, many battleships had also become coffins. Of course, those coffin-like warships did not have a huge black tomb guard dog on them. It had taken the black battleship many days to sail from Chaotian to here. In order to save time, the black battleship had taken the risk of accelerating the gravitational pull of the permanent star twice, and used the time window to let Yuan Shu, Su Zai, and the others absorb more fairy energy. In addition to the fairy energy, they had also absorbed more knowledge through the intensive classes organized by Shen Yunmai. The forced learning method of the human-brain interaction system was a bit monotonous, and, as Peng Lang said, it was not deep enough. Now, not only did they know the anti-addiction system of the game, the level of the tickets to the vacation planet, and the classification of neurological drugs, but they also knew that the big shots were not necessarily strong men in the reaching heaven state. They could also be university physics students. Yuan Shu and the others were still not used to this new world. After all, they had just ascended and entered this coffin warship, which was isolated from the rest of the world. They did not have the chance to really come into contact with that world. It was like a country bumpkin who was locked in a university library when they first entered the city. Even if they learned how to take the subway and the elevator automatically opened, it did not mean that they could really integrate into the city life. As a result, both the thick-skinned Jing Jiao and the hard-hearted Su Zai were at a loss of what to do. It seemed that they were quite restless. Of course, the real source of this unease was because of the purpose of their trip. Assassinate the patriarch of Aoyama. This was too exciting. Shin Yunmai had been observing these guys coldly, especially Peng Lang. Jing Jiu had once told him that Peng Lang was more talented than him. Of course, he was not convinced. However, after observing Peng Lang for the past few days, he realized that Peng Lang was very obedient and even a little dull. It did feel a little unfathomable. After today's study class was over, Peng Lang began to review the questions with a pen in his hand. Yuan Chu and Yushan looked at the sceneries of various planets on the computer screen, laughing from time to time. Suzai was talking to Tong Yin about something, which seemed to be related to Hejan. Kane Yang walked to the front of the robot, raised her head, and asked, "Are you sure that nobody knows about this surprise attack plan?" Shin Yunmai said, "Unless the one without eyebrows betrays us again." In the story of Chao Tian, Tong Yin jumped sideways many times. Hearing this, Tong Yin turned around and shot him a glance. Suzai took the opportunity to give her a thumbs up, expressing his approval. Shin Yunmai said, "Don't give me the thumbs up. It reminded me of Insheng, that boring guy." Kane Yang was slightly taken aback and said, "I think I've heard this name somewhere." Peng Lang put down the paper and pen in his hand and looked at Shin Yunmai. He sat down obediently like a child who was about to listen to a story. "That's right, I told you last time. This is the founding grandmaster of your No Mercy sect. In a sense, he can be considered the disciple of my old man," Shin Yunmai said. "He has a good talent in the sword work, and his temperament is not too twisted, but he is a bit stubborn." Kane Yang said, "You said the other day that the number of the immortals of the previous generation who had ascended was more than what was recorded in the books. Even if nobody knows about this surprise attack plan, can a few of us defeat so many immortals of the previous generation?" Shin Yunmai said, "The ancestral planet is a forbidden place. Even I can't get close to it without permission. How could those guys be there?" Tong Yin was aware of what Kane Yang was thinking about, saying, "I'll ask him to list out the combat strength list." Shin Yunmai sneered, "I'll remind you that I'm the chief commander." Tong Yin said calmly, "I'll remind you that you can't defeat anybody right now." Shin Yunmai said, "I'll remind you that I can destroy this battleship." Tong Yin said, "I'll remind you that you're the one who wants to kill Shin Aoyama the most." As Shin Yunmai was about to say something, Kane Yang interrupted him politely. "I'll remind you that we don't have much time left." Shin Yunmai's version of the combat strength list of the ascendants of Chao Tian appeared in everybody's hands. Peng Lang skimmed through the list briefly and began to read the life experiences of the great grandmaster, the admiration on his face growing stronger. Suzai had cultivated for hundreds of years, and the corpse poison was almost completely removed from his body. The color on his face had grown lighter, but as he read the combat strength list, he found that the color on his face grew darker, resembling the wilted leaves in the midsummer. It was an unhealthy dark green color. Yuan Chu and Yushan whispered to each other while looking at the combat strength list, as if they were still looking at the scenery of a scenic spot. They were here for sightseeing anyway. Kane Yang was the only one who looked at the list calmly and earnestly, and she would communicate with Shin Yunmai once in a while. The Dongi Daoist sect has always said that one of their ancestors hadn't ascended. Is it true? Cheng Shuang has a high cultivation state and an eccentric magic method. He's good at attacking the spiritual awareness. It's a bit troublesome to deal with him. He's indeed the grandmaster of the Zen sections. The Great Compassion monk's fighting prowess is only inferior to that of the Great Grandmaster. Seng Ju is good at studying, but he doesn't know how to fight. Is the immortal Wen the rumored one who killed Nanning with a sword? That's right. Yeah, Fairy, he was my idol when I was little. Does she really like wearing purple dresses? Yes, she looks like an eggplant. I'm afraid the ancestral master of Penglai Island is almost 20,000 years old. It's only been a few hundred years since he ascended. We can't count it like that. Didn't the stone man of Mount Shun Wu have several fingers chopped off by the master's sword? Why is his ranking so high? Tong Yin chimed in. Chunya is indeed very difficult to deal with. Think about the stone turtle on Tianguang Peak. Only the sword of the immortal Jingyang can break through its defense, unless we can find a suitable weapon, such as miniaturizing the plasma cannon. Kanyang asked, why aren't there any records about these two black-robed demon immortals in the classics? Guzhua and Guyu are a pair of twin brothers. Their cultivation methods are a bit strange. I've seen them many times since I was little, but I still can't tell them apart. One is happy, and the other is sad. It should be a foreshadowing left by the old man. It might be related to the mutual circulation of the spiritual souls. Be careful. It might also be related to the mutual illumination of yin and yang. If they join hands to form a formation of heaven and earth, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult to deal with them. The nuclear bombs should be able to disturb the energy of yin and yang. Su Zai's gloomy voice interrupted the discussion that sounded both academic and casual. 31 immortals of the previous generations are either grandmasters or peerless geniuses. How the hell can we defeat them? Peng Lang nodded, thinking that he couldn't defeat so many seniors, and he didn't even want to fight his mother-in-law. I haven't even seen the cities on those planets, the big waves on those vacation planets, the technology of biological modification, gene editing, and brainwave technology. Won't it be too much of a loss if I die like this? Su Zai was from a mysterious dark sect, so he was naturally interested in those things. Yuan Chu chimed in, yeah. We haven't even seen them, but we are going to deceive our masters and ancestors and seek refuge in death. Isn't it too much? Xin Yunmai snapped. Just look at the papers and the pictures. Why are you asking for so much? If I didn't risk my life to cheer you on, how could you two ascend with your current level? How many years do you have to endure? You'll die of exhaustion. There are enough fairy books in Chaotian to make up for the loss of spiritual energy after ascension. This is the reason why ascension is so easy, Su Zai said with a sneer. Even without you, do you really think I can't come out? Shen Yunmai's voice was full of mockery as he said, you should go back as soon as possible. Why do you want to board my battleship shamelessly? Go back. The battleship was traveling in the spacious and empty space according to the calculated route map, far away from any celestial bodies. If he got off the battleship at the moment, he would drift around endlessly and become a dried corpse after the fairy energy evaporated. Su Zai didn't agree to it. However, if he didn't agree to it, he wouldn't be able to out-talk Xin Yunmai. If he couldn't out-talk Xin Yunmai, he would have to fight him with his fists clenched. Yushan was worried that the two of them would quarrel, so he pushed Yuan Chu away hastily and changed the topic. As a matter of fact, Senior Master Jing Jiao and the Immortal Tan left behind the fairy books, and so did the fairy lady Byron. But why didn't it happen before? If the ferrymen had spent some time absorbing the fairy energy after ascension and tempered them into the fairy books and tossed them back to Chaotian to make up for the energy of heaven and earth they had taken away, the barrier between Chaotian and the real universe wouldn't have been broken, and more ascendants would have appeared in the cultivation circle, which would have helped the humans in the war against the sea of dark matter. The reason was not complicated, but why didn't the predecessors do it? Xin Yunmai knew some of the reasons, saying, the old man and those guys didn't dare act recklessly. What if they tempered the fairy books and tossed them back to Chaotian, releasing the energy of heaven and earth that could be accommodated in that world and breaking the barrier of the space? Yuan Chu caught the error in his wording and said, oh, you mean my senior master and the Immortal Tan are acting recklessly? Xin Yunmai sneered and said, it's because Jing Jiao and that person's surname Tan could observe the situation in Chaotian after their ascension. That's why they dared make the fairy books and toss them back. I think the person named by Run did the same thing. Tong Yin suddenly said, the immortal Jingyang doesn't know the secret method of our Cloud Dream Mountain. It's his own method to look back at the old place. Yushan was still puzzled, asking, the Zhongzhou school also has some seniors who have ascended. Why didn't the Grandmaster ask them to help check it out? Xin Yunmai sighed while looking at her, saying, what a naive child. Su Zai and Yuan Chu fixed their gazes on Tong Yin. Even Peng Lang lifted his head to glance at her. The fairy ladies of the Zhongzhou school had all died in this patch of the universe. Yushan thought it through, feeling a bit chilly. He didn't want Tong Yin to think about it. So he changed the topic again, asking, since the fairy lady Bai Run could use the fairy books to solve the problem of the loss of the energy of heaven and earth, why did she sneak attack Senior Master Jingjiu? Shen Yinmai maneuvered the robot to raise its right arm and pointed at Tong Yin, saying, "You have to ask him." Tong Yin said, "My senior master saw the endless void after her ascension and sensed the existence of the sea of dark matter, so she didn't dare travel far. It's probably because she didn't want other ascendants to attract the attention of the heavenly demons of the outside world and bring a catastrophe to Chaotian. Those fairy books are her gifts to her descendants and have nothing to do with anything else." Byron had left 6 fairy books, all of which were on Cloud Dream Mountain. This was different from the way Jing Jiao, the Immortal Tan, and Jian Shalai left their fairy books after their ascension. Judging from this, Tong Yan's evaluation of her senior master should be objective and correct. According to the stories I've heard since my childhood and the study of that book, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in Chaotian is indeed decreasing, but it's not in the barren period yet. Jing Jiao's method is a bit risky. What if something goes wrong? Shen Yunmai raised the arms of the robot and sighed while looking up at the sky. Yuan Chu said, "The fact proves that Senior Master is always right." Shen Yunmai pulled back his arms and said, "That's why I like him." Yushan blinked a few times to make sure that he didn't hear it wrong. Shen Yunmai continued, "Why doesn't the old man dare take the risk and forbid anyone from disturbing Chaotian? It's because the old man has the strength and willpower, but he doesn't have the confidence. In fact, he's an out-and-out pessimist." Yushan asked curiously, "What is it that the Grand Master doesn't have the confidence to do?" Shen Yunmai said expressionlessly, "No matter how well the Federation of the Milky Way develops and how powerful the human civilization is, it's merely at the level of the distant ancient civilization. Even if he ignited those permanent stars with the all-in-one, it would be tasteless and repetitive. He thinks that he's the one chosen by God. Even God hasn't solved the problem of the sea of dark matter. How can he do it?" Yuan Chu said in surprise, "I thought the Grand Master was confident enough to force Senior Master to do so." Shen Yunmai sneered, "Confident? If he could surrender, he would have done so a long time ago. The problem is that he knows it's meaningless to surrender, but he can't abandon the sacred responsibility. As a result, he feels more and more miserable and becomes more and more abnormal." His evaluation of his father was even more vicious than Tong Yan's evaluation of the fairy lady Bai Run. Tong Yin shot him a glance. Thinking of what Zhao Leu had told Ran Handong and Jing Jiao about the young woman in the bathrobe, she realized that the pessimism was hereditary. It's because he doesn't have the confidence in himself and the Federation of the Milky Way that he forbids any attempt to open up Chaotian. If the humans are destined to perish, they have to leave a place to preserve some hope, like what God did back then. Shen Yunmai gave his conclusion in the end. He said to Yushan, "Do you find it boring? Get over it. There's no logic in the universe, and there's no point in existing. We're just messing around." Su Zai said expressionlessly, "If so, why are we still going to the ancestral planet? I don't want to fight 30 immortals. How many times have I told you? No one knows that we are going to the ancestral star. None of us will meet him." Shen Yunmai was a little annoyed and said, "It's just bullying an old man fishing by the seaside. What's there to be afraid of?" Jing Jiao didn't know that a space crack had appeared in the Heavenly Fire Industrial Base, that the sea of dark matter had invaded the Moon Gazer planet, that 9 black suns had appeared in the human sky, and that the Snow Girl and Jing Jiao had shown up. And they didn't know that the era of the Federation of the Milky Way had changed. The black warship continued toward the homeworld like a lone and fearless assassin. One day, the dead dog narrowed his eyes while squatting on the battleship. In the distant depths of the universe, there was an extremely small white spot of light. For some reason, it felt a little dazzling. The protective board of the battleship opened slowly, exposing a hole on one side. The hole was made by Tong Yin. He didn't take a look at the space outside the hole. as he was focused on searching for the signal. This place was the forbidden land of the Federation of the Milky Way and the black spot in the charter. To say nothing of the auxiliary network, it didn't even have a specific signal generator, so it was not easy to get in touch with Zhao Liu. Yuan Chu, Su Zai, and the others came to the hole in the battleship and looked at the small light spot in the distance, feeling a bit excited. Peng Lang stood on his tiptoes behind them, a curious expression on his face. They all looked like tourists who had finally seen the gate of the scenic spot after sitting for more than 10 hours. The huge robot leaned against the alloy wall at the entrance of the hole in a casual posture, looking like a ticketing clerk who was dazzled by the sun, but he blocked a large part of the gate leading to the scenic spot. That place is the rumored solar system. Why is it called the solar system? Hearing Su Zai's question, Shen Yunmai felt displeased, saying, "It's because that permanent star is called the sun." Su Zai said, "According to the astronomical definition and convention, the main permanent star of any galaxy can be called the sun by the people in this galaxy. Chaotian has a sun as well, and we've been calling it that for many years. Do you know how this convention came about?" Shen Yunmai went on in a growling tone. "It's because it's the first permanent star seen by humans after the human civilization was born, the earliest sun." A heated quarrel was about to take place inexplicably. Young Sister Yushan suddenly pointed at a spot in the dark space and exclaimed in surprise, "What's that?" The others knew that she didn't change the topic intentionally, because they had all seen the damaged spacecraft. The damaged spacecraft was very small, and it was in a terrible condition. The inside of the spacecraft could be seen through the severe damage. The most amazing part was that a Taoist in black clothing was sitting cross-legged on the spacecraft, like how the dead dog sat on the battleship. The Taoist in black clothing exuded a faint sword will, which could be sensed even though it was 100 kilometers away. Sensing it for a moment, one could tell that his cultivation state was much higher than that of Yuan Chu and Yushan, and much stronger than that of Su Zai. A dozen people were sitting on the damaged spacecraft. The person in the front was tall and sturdy, looking like a rock, giving off a feeling that he was indestructible. The rest of them had different but equally powerful energies. According to Shen Yunmai, the ancestral planet was a forbidden land devoid of any human beings. So how could they encounter a spacecraft? The universe was so vast, but why did the spacecraft encounter them from a distance of 100 kilometers? It was no different from a head-on collision on the scale of the universe. More importantly, how could the people on the spacecraft be so powerful? Everybody, including Peng Lang, was stunned. Even the dead dog showed a hint of surprise in his eyes. How could the people they encountered in this place, called the Federation of the Milky Way, be so powerful? What was the point of this? Didn't they say that this place was not the fairy world? Didn't you say that nobody was here? Su Zai asked in a low voice. Shen Yunmai coughed twice. It was because he didn't have a body, so his voice sounded a bit weird, which was quite embarrassing. They're the ferrymen. Huh. Chapter 987. A few days ago, all the battleships in the universe were locked up, turning into coffins hovering in the space. Chunya and the other 5 immortals came to the broken hull of the transit station and looked at the battleships in the distance, remaining silent for a long time. The words left by Zhao Liu before the communication was cut off were still echoing in their minds. The most important issue in this world was distance. After they ascended and left Chaotian, they were led by the Grandmaster and General Li to this new interstellar civilization. The whole process was smooth, and the transition was quite natural. They had never thought of such an issue. Relying on the quantum long-distance communication system, Chinya contacted those colleagues who were heading toward the Jale Passage but were forced to stay in the same place, ascertaining their safety and location. "What should we do now?" asked the devil immortal in black, Guzwa, icily. "Should we just wait here?" Another devil immortal in black, Guzwa's elder brother, retorted expressionlessly, "Should we wait for death?" Chinya said expressionlessly, "They can't control the battleships to fight yet. We still have a chance. But the main planet is so far away from here. How can we kill her?" asked another immortal. As I said, Jing Jiao and the Snow Girl are going to the ancestral planet, and those people are going to harm the Grandmaster. So we have to go there as well. Chunya's thinking was always simple, so the conclusion he came up with was closer to the truth. Goose was sneered. We don't have a battleship. How can we go there? If we can't use the twisted passage, how many years will it take for us to fly for tens of thousands of light years? We will die while flying, and then drift to the ancestral planet in the form of a corpse? Is this what you call the soul returning to the hometown? The immortals who could ascend must have achieved some attainments in the Tao. Some of them were naive, like Lu Rujui, and Shun Yunmai. But those who took this path were inevitably talkative, and sometimes naive was no different from me. Chunya turned to them and said sharply, "You all have your own planets and inhabitants. I know you must have your own battleships, but you didn't connect to the central computer and didn't tell us about them." The expressions on the faces of the few immortals didn't change, but they were actually a bit embarrassed because the truth had been revealed. One of the immortals coughed twice and said, "The great Grandmaster told us not to affect the progress of the civilization of the Federation of the Milky Way. The planets assigned to us are all remote. It would take too long for the battleships to arrive." Chunya thought about it and realized that it was indeed the case. He said, "If that's the case, let's start from another aspect. The universe is so big, and there must be many spaceships that are not connected to the internet. Let's try to get one." In order to deal with the threat of the sea of dark matter, the central computer was allowed to perform some remote physical operations in an emergency since the middle and later period of the distant ancient civilization, but it was more restricted for the civilian use. This mode of operation had lasted until the era of the Federation of the Milky Way. In other words, the current central computer had a higher level of authority, but the scope of its authority had been reduced. In terms of information collection, it was far inferior to the glorious charter of the past. Naturally, its control over the various planets had also been greatly reduced. It was also for this reason that there were still so many space pirates surviving in the universe. The spaceships that the ferrymen could get were most likely the spaceships of the pirate spaceships. They connected to the interplanetary network at the transit station and entered the hidden network, releasing the delicious bait. Guzwa happened to bring a top grade or from the Huangyu No. 2 planet with him, which was a souvenir from the battle against the Sea of Dark Matter. The Federation of the Milky Way had invested so many ground troops and sacrificed so many elite soldiers to obtain this, or it was evident how precious it was. As soon as the news appeared on the hidden network, it was like a stone thrown into the water, causing countless ripples. At least a dozen pirate forces had responded to the news. It was believed that many pirate spaceships would arrive in the following days. As such, there was another problem. Which spaceship should they use? Some ferrymen thought that they should choose the fastest one. Some thought that they should consider the comfort level of the spaceship, and some thought that they should consider the weapon system. In the end, Chunya made a simple decision. We'll use the one that arrived first. Guzwa said, "The first one doesn't mean that it's the fastest. It's probably that the space pirates are the closest to us. It means that they are lucky." Looking at the dark universe and the billions of distant stars outside the transit station, Chunya said after a moment of silence, "We might need some luck." 2 days later, a black spaceship arrived at the transit station outside the Gray Passage. Since they were space pirates, they were very cautious and cautious. The weapon system had been turned on and aimed at the front. The voice of the pirate captain came out from the other side after the information channel was set up. The ferrymen couldn't help but furrow their brows when they saw the damaged spaceship in the space. They didn't even listen to what the captain was saying. Guzwa sighed and said, "These pirates might be lucky, but our luck is obviously not so good. In fact, those pirates weren't so lucky either." This worn-out spaceship was being repaired at a pirate base up ahead. Suddenly discovering this deal, the captain, who was blinded by profit, did not even think about it. He flew over with his 3 subordinates, and the ending that greeted them was naturally extremely miserable. The pirates were naturally vicious, and they did not hesitate to open fire when they realized that something was wrong. But nothing happened. All the weapon systems were disabled, and they died silently, their corpses floating outside the spaceship. Guzwa stood in the cockpit with his hands in his sleeves, looking at the dust on his black clothes and the simple and narrow cabin. He suddenly had the urge to destroy this broken ship. However, when he thought of Chunya's words, he could only sigh and say through the communication system, "The engine is new, and it's not bad. The shielding system is a little old, but if we are careful, we should be able to pass through the spatial tunnel." The immortals entered the pirate ship one after another, and the narrow cabin became a little crowded. Chunya gave up his seat and stood in front of the cockpit, calling up the homeworld's spatial coordinates, and said, "Depart." It was at that moment that an indifferent and irrefutable voice spoke through the comms. "Come pick me up." The one who spoke was the sword immortal Enchantment. Like the other immortals, he was also on the flight path to the Gray Passage and was stopped in space. Chunya looked at his position and confirmed that there was no need to take a long detour. Wait. It did not take long before more voices spoke through the comms. The immortals who knew that they had obtained a pirate ship all requested to pick them up like Enchantment. Guzwa looked at Chunya and said a few words without saying a word. What he meant was that the pirate ship was so small, how could they fit inside? Hence, the tattered pirate ship began the immortals' journey to rescue the homeworld. Under normal circumstances, it was fine. The pirate ship's new engine was quite powerful, and it was very fast. However, when passing through the warped void, it was really a little scary, especially for Guzwa. His demonic eyes were filled with worry and pessimism. Fortunately, there were no sudden accidents, although they did pick up a few more immortals along the way. Chunya ignored Guzwa's worry. Since they were certain that they would not be delayed, it was best to bring a few more companions. As for the pirate ship's small size, they could just squeeze a little. They could float in the air anyway and make full use of space. The first person to be picked up by the pirate ship was sword immortal Enchantment. He didn't expect the pirate ship to be so shabby and small. He touched his nose with his mechanical hand and didn't say anything. He found a device bag at the back and sat on it. As more and more immortals were picked up, the pirate ship became more and more crowded. These people were either the grandmasters of their sex or the chosen ones back in Chao Tian, and now they were the important figures who had their own planets. They had never suffered such humiliation before, so they couldn't help but complain. The immortal Wuan, who was picked up by the edge of the left heaven region, squeezed Guzwi out of the ship uncomfortably while holding the huge sword in his chest. When I first came to this world many years ago, old Dan took me to planet Tianpu to have a look, he said sentimentally. You know him? He likes to pretend to be an ordinary person, so he insisted on taking me to the Northwest University China to watch some football match. There were so many people there that I couldn't stand it. Unfortunately, the air conditioner in the carriage was broken, and the smell of sweat filled the carriage. I couldn't stand it even if I shut my senses, so I got off the carriage halfway. He suddenly asked, "Speaking of which, what is old Dan doing now? I haven't seen him for many years." Chunya and the two devil immortals in black didn't respond. Insheng suddenly opened his eyes and shot a glance at the back of Chunya's neck. The gazes of a few other immortals fell on Chunya as well. It suddenly became quiet on the pirate ship. The immortal Wuan shrugged his shoulders, feeling bored, and said, "It's even more crowded than that carriage. Fortunately, you people don't sweat." Nobody responded to him. The atmosphere in the cabin grew a bit depressing. Such a plot was common in many stories. Many companions who were scattered all over the place would gather together again for a very important mission. This kind of plot was popular and even regarded as a classic, but it was because the purpose was clear and everyone had a firm will. These immortals were emperors, kings, and even gods on their own planets, but they were merely passengers on this pirate ship. This tattered pirate ship was heading toward the future of the humans. They couldn't control the direction, and they had no idea what the destination would be. The immortal Qi song is dead, General Li is dead, that Junior Jinshalai is dead, and the Grandmaster Great Compassion is possessed by the devil. Guzwa pushed the immortal Wuan back into the cabin and looked at the sleeve of his black cloth intently. No matter what, we're all from Chaotian, but so many of us have killed each other in a few short years. Is it worth it? He said as if he were talking to himself. Chunya didn't turn his head around. Looking at the endless universe outside the window, he said expressionlessly, "No matter what you want to say, and what you people want to say, I hope you can finish it before we arrive on the ancestral planet." Guzwa lifted his head, a hint of sadness showing in his coquettish eyes. "It's all because of the arrival of Jingjio," he said. "But is there really no other way besides using the all-in-one sword to ignite those permanent stars?" "Are you doubting the wisdom of the Grandmasters?" Chunya demanded expressionlessly. Guzwa retorted, "All the scientists know the importance and necessity of the spirit of doubt. Are we, the cultivation practitioners, inferior to them?" The fairy swordsman, En Sheng, raised his mechanical hand in the rear cabin to signal for them to stop arguing. Then he said a long speech, which was rare for him. "It's true that nobody can judge who is right or wrong. The future is not history, and there's no way to summarize the experience. All the strategies are in fact gambling. That was why Jing Jiu said in the galaxy outside the fog last year that whoever won and survived would be on the right side. They should stand on the winner's side. No, we should strive to be the winning side. All we need to do now is think about how to win." An old ferryman with white hair, wearing a colorful cloth, sat in the most comfortable chair in the front passenger seat after he boarded the pirate ship. After resting with his eyes closed for a long time, he suddenly opened his eyes and said, "Yes, I can't afford to lose to those juniors. Please tell me, godly master," Chunya said sharply. The godly master asked, "How should we deal with the scholar with many treasures? Your body can't withstand those magic treasures and that kind of fighting style." The ferrymen started discussing after a moment of silence. They shouldn't think that they were ordinary just because they were crammed into this shabby pirate ship. 3 of Chunya's fingers were cut off by Jing Jiu. Chang Shuang was knocked flying by Ada, and the happy monk was defeated by Lu Shui, but it didn't mean that they were not that powerful. They shouldn't forget that they were the true ferrymen just because the term ferrymen had a ferryman in it. They had their own names in the history of Chaotian. Even those who didn't have a name must have been the most outstanding swordsmen of their time, possessing the highest intelligence, willpower, or other talents of the human race. It didn't take long for the ferrymen to come up with many plans. For example, what kind of formation and coordination should be used to prevent Lu Shui from employing those magic treasures? Then, they made corresponding arrangements for Zhao Liu's sword work of Aoyama and white ghost magic of fairy energy. Tong Yan's cultivation state was ordinary, so they didn't make any serious arrangements. Jing Jiu couldn't wake up, so he wasn't a threat. As for the snow girl, it was even simpler. All of them would swarm over and leave it to fate. During the process of complaining, discussing, and meditating, the pirate ship full of ferrymen had gradually moved toward the edge of the galaxy. One day, the pirate ship had finally arrived at the periphery of the solar system. The shabby spaceship couldn't stand it anymore after passing through the space passage for the last time. As it was awakened, the walls of the ship fell apart, with countless holes appearing on them. As long as they had enough fairy energy, they wouldn't have to worry about being frozen by the coldness of the universe. On the contrary, they felt much more comfortable with the broken windows and broken doors. The fairy sword, En Sheng, simply flew onto the ship and sat there. It was an indescribable elegance, but it was also rather odd. The sun was in a distant place, so the regular people couldn't see it at all. It was merely a tiny light speck in their eyes. It was the first time for some of the ferrymen to come here, so they felt sentimental. Guyu said, "There is no energy fluctuation in the galaxy, so the ancestral planet should be safe." Guzwa said, "It looks like His Majesty and Jing Jiu haven't arrived yet." "Well, what a big dog." The ferrymen on the pirate ship looked at a spot hundreds of kilometers away. There was a black warship there. There was a hole on the side of the warship, which looked just like their ship. A few people were standing at the hole on the warship, looking at them. What was even more miraculous was that there was a gigantic black dog lying on top of the warship. Chinya asked, "This is the Shun family's warship. Who are those people?" In Shung said expressionlessly, "You can tell just by looking at that dog, a new ascender has arrived." The first Master God Striker looked at the hole on the wall and said in surprise, "Can such a thing be done in bulk?" Apex. Chapter 988. "Don't panic," Shin Yunmai said in a drawling voice. Yuan Chu shot him a gloomy glance, thinking that who wouldn't panic when encountering such a situation? Though the spaceship looked shabby, the people on the spaceship were not shabby. They were the elites of the history of Chaotian. On their way here, Shin Yunmai had given them the information about the Ascendants. Comparing the information with the history of Chaotian, they were well aware of the identities of those ferrymen. They were either the grandmasters of some sect or the unparalleled talents in the world. Shin Yunmai said comfortingly, "Don't worry, they can't defeat me." When he was the chief advisor of the military, he was indeed unrivaled in the universe, until he encountered Jing Jiao. The problem was that he was only left with a head and a huge and cumbersome mechanical body. How could he be a match for those immortals? "Is that fairy lady in purple the fairy maiden he?" Yushan asked admiringly while cupping his hands in front of him. The fairy maiden, he was the daughter of the Tian family in Chaotian 10,000 years ago. She had ascended one day and was the idol of many female cultivation practitioners, as well as one of Yushan's idols. Yet, why did the spaceship of those ferrymen of the previous generations look so shabby and in such a sorry state? What had happened to them? Standing behind them, Peng Lang stood on tiptoe and looked at the Taoist in black on the shabby spaceship. He figured out the identity of the other party. He tidied up his clothes hastily and was about to bow to the ground. All of a sudden, two surprise screams burst out from the broken hole in the battleship. Peng Lang drifted toward the deep part of the battleship on the left. He didn't stop until he arrived at the operating room in the deepest part of the battleship. The shabby pirate spaceship had been left far behind. The black battleship suddenly sped up. The crystal engine was fully activated, heading toward the white that in the distance at a high speed. The blue flames illuminated the universe, as if to swallow the white, giving off a ferocious feeling. It was Tong Yan's decision. It was not because they were afraid of the ferrymen on the pirate spaceship that they wanted to flee. They had to enter the solar system before those ferrymen, land on the ancestral planet, and kill the Grandmaster of Aoyama. As long as the Grandmaster of Aoyama was killed, Jing Jiao would be able to wake up and gain true freedom. In that case, the difference in strength between the two sides would be completely reversed. Peng Lang flew back to the front of the warship and looked at Tong Yan, who was focused on the route. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he just sighed. The shipboard computer was in charge of the calculation of the ship route, and Tong Yan was in charge of the operation. Shin Yunmai, the self-appointed general commander, actually had nothing to do. He pointed at the light beam and introduced to the others, "This place is called the Kuiper Belt. In a narrow sense, the edge of the solar system is here." Before he finished speaking, the warship suddenly shook violently and began to decelerate rapidly. As soon as the shrill alarm sounded, it was turned off. Tong Yin said, "Coming." Yuan Shu and the others looked back and saw that the tattered pirate ship had actually followed them. What was going on? Yushan's expression changed slightly as he said with a trembling voice, "Immortals pouncing on butterflies?" Tong Yin suddenly looked to the side. It was unclear when Kane Yang had gotten her hands on a terminal and was operating something attentively with her head lowered. The black warship suddenly accelerated toward the solar system. Chinya was slow to react, but some people understood what he meant in an instant. The purple-clothed immortal nun snorted coldly and stood at the forefront of the pirate ship, pointing forward with her right hand. Her eyes were closed, and her face looked a bit pale, her eyelashes fluttering. A shapeless energy came out from the tip of her finger and dissipated in the void. Then it reappeared several thousand miles away. The energy weaved into a net and enveloped the black warship. It was for this reason that the black warship suddenly decelerated. The scene looked like a butterfly pouncing on butterflies, but it was more like a trap for a horse. The black warship seemed to be pulling the tattered pirate ship along, so it was impossible for it to pull away. The two sides were separated by several thousand miles. In the boundless universe, it was no different from rubbing shoulders. If those immortals got any closer, they would be in great danger. Shin Yunmai said while looking at the pirate ship on the light beam, "Blow them up." The weapon system of the black warship opened fire fiercely. Hundreds of bright and dreadful rays of light shot toward the rear. Seeing the oncoming rays of light, the sword immortal in Shang squinted slightly. He held the hilt of his sword with his right hand, but he didn't move. It was because Chunya had come to the front of the pirate ship. He raised his right hand horizontally, which turned into a huge stone shield. The rays of light fell on the surface of the stone shield soundlessly, stirring up some dust. "It's wishful thinking to block us with laser cannons," one of the immortals said with a sneer. Before his voice had died away, the pirate ship had been brought forward several thousand miles by the black warship. The dust left by the warship was scattered in the dark space, which should be the small celestial bodies that had been smashed. This place was not completely out of the Kuiper Belt. It seemed to be spacious, but many meteorites were actually hidden here. The pirate ship followed the trail of the dust, brushed past a few meteorites, and kept moving forward. All of a sudden, a few strong energy fluctuations came. A few perfectly round fireballs expanded at an unimaginable speed, engulfing the pirate ship in an instant. It didn't take long for the huge fireballs to dissipate, turning into tens of thousands of smaller fireballs drifting away. The figure of the pirate ship reappeared with countless holes on it. It was like a small fishing boat that had been sailing in huge waves for more than 10 days. If it wasn't for the fact that there was nothing in the empty universe, it would have been destroyed long ago. The two brothers, Gu Zhua and Gu Yu, retracted their palms. The edges of their black sleeves were also burned with many holes. At the critical moment of the sinister explosion, they had set up a complementary formation in time to protect this broken ship. Hixia Nun still had her right hand raised, locking onto the black warship with her immortal opportunity. Her eyelashes were slightly raised. The divine battering master sat beside her and was also at the very front of the pirate ship. After suffering the first wave of explosion, he was caught off guard and suffered some injuries. His white beard was a little burnt, and it curled up carelessly under his chin, looking rather ridiculous. He stared angrily at the black warship in front of him and shouted, "How dare you!" As soon as he finished speaking, he threw a punch in that direction. Following the direction of the punch, hundreds of golden rings left his wrist and crossed thousands of kilometers to arrive in front of him. The black warship was attacked the moment it was illuminated by the golden rings. Hundreds of huge golden rings broke the protective shield of the warship easily, smashed a few sword wheels that had just taken shape, and landed on the warship. No sound could be heard in the universe, but the badly damaged surface of the warship and the smoke and dust generated by the explosion could be seen. There were many small meteorites in the Kuiper Belt. The knowledge of astronomy that Kane Nyang had just learned was put to good use at this moment. She skillfully, or rather insidiously, deployed a dozen dark thunder in space there, and even used the magic of the mirror sect to imitate the appearance of the meteorites. Even though those fairy immortals could see through the magic of the mirror sect, who would notice this when they were in the middle of a space chase? As expected, the pirate ship was ambushed and was almost destroyed by the explosion. However, before Shin Yunmai could express his appreciation for her, the black warship was retaliated by those fairy immortals. The monitoring system and automatic defense system did not play any role in the face of the hundreds of golden rings. Fortunately, the violent explosion was soon drowned out by Yushan's violent snowstorm, so a bigger disaster wasn't caused. However, the warship was still badly damaged, especially those golden rings that had entered the body of the warship. Before they were controlled by Yuan Chu, the light of the magic treasures had destroyed many chips of the equipment, causing a troublesome problem in the control valve of the crystal engine. The sword that looked like a plum blossom hovered in front of Yuan Shu, emitting a silk-like sword string that bound a dozen golden rings tightly. The golden rings quivered violently, making a sound that sounded like the zither. Looking at the severely damaged tail of the warship and sensing the profound energy in those golden rings, Yuan Shu exclaimed in astonishment with a pale face. How could they have such a powerful force from a distance of a few thousand kilometers? What kind of magic treasure is this? Cain Yang wiped the sweat off her forehead and said softly, "It's the method of hitting the divine masters." The fairy woman He, the immortal Wuan, Chunya, and the divine masters were all the most outstanding cultivation practitioners in Chaotian back then, and they were the true fairy immortals now, so their cultivation states were exceedingly high. It was then that those powerful golden rings came again. Yushan drifted to the rear of the warship and waved his hand to extinguish the remaining fire by the engine with a cold intent. He waved his sword attentively, employing the snow-flowing sword style to form hundreds of hard ice cubes at the rear of the warship. Yuan Shu waved his sword to break those golden rings into pieces. He drifted to the side of his wife and wielded his sword to hack at them as well. As the ice cubes were shattered by the golden rings, countless sword strings broke through the air and headed toward the pirate ship at the rear. An exceedingly beautiful and unreasonable sword light lit up on the pirate ship. Countless sword lights and the light of the magic treasures appeared in the dark space, attacking each other from a distance of a few thousand kilometers. It was quite a bustling scene for a while. Though they looked like fireworks, they were actually very dangerous. The pirate ship was badly damaged, but it didn't break apart. It didn't slow down, even though it was unimaginable to the fairy woman. On the contrary, it was getting closer and closer. If the 13 fairy men on the pirate ship worked together, what would happen? "We have to get rid of them as soon as possible," Shun Yunmai said sharply while looking at the light screen. The key issue at the moment was the huge, invisible net of the fairy woman. Yuan Chu and Yushan had tried twice in the beginning, and Shun Yunmai had also tried with the weapon system on the warship, but they couldn't cut off those invisible lines. "It's done," Su Zai's voice suddenly rang out on the warship. The people followed his gaze and looked toward a corner. They saw him sitting on the ground with a pale face and blood seeping out from his fingers. It looked extremely bloody. He had remained silent since the appearance of the pirate ship until now. It seemed that he was not afraid of fight. The blood seeping out from his fingers had a faint green color and turned into tiny balls that drifted to the outside of the warship. It was unclear when the balls had traveled to many places soundlessly, covering a large area of the warship and leaving no place unnoticed. In the darkness of a universe, those invisible lines were also dyed with a green color and appeared. With a buzzing sound, those lines started shaking as if they wanted to get rid of the green color, but it was too late. The bright demon flames came out from Su Zai's fingertips and set those lines ablaze at an unimaginable speed. Those burning lines couldn't hold on for a long time. They all broke apart. There seemed to be countless crackling sounds in the soundless space. The black warship seemed to have become lighter, and its speed increased instantly. Soon, it would pass through the Kuiper Belt and enter the real solar system. Yuan Shu and Yushan drifted back from the rear of the warship, looking at Su Zai with a smile. Su Zai didn't say anything. He walked to the side of Tong Yin and said earnestly, "Can I not do anything when we kill the great grandmaster of Aoyama?" "Let's talk about it when we get there," said Tong Yin. Looking at the data on the terminal, Cain Yang said, "We've shaken off that ship, but the speed is limited in the galaxy, and we have to evade the defense system of the galaxy. It will take us another 7 hours to reach the ancestral planet." Shin Yunmai suddenly pointed at a spot on the light screen and said, "Avoid that spot." It was a small celestial body, a bit dark and extremely cold. Compared to the other celestial bodies in the Kuiper Belt, this celestial body was nothing special. And according to the route of the warship, it would only pass by the celestial body from a long distance, so it wouldn't be affected. The human civilization was a bit underdeveloped in the early days, so they regarded it as a large planet. It was later removed from the list Shin Yunmai explained. And its name is not good either because it has something to do with the underworld. It's not very auspicious. Neither the cultivation practitioners nor the scientists had anything to do with superstition. Yet, as the two paths reached the end, they would inevitably encounter some mysterious and unexplainable fields, and the taboo would naturally come into being. Tong Yin adjusted the course of the worship according to Shun Yunmai's request. The underworld moved further away from the window than expected. It seemed that they had forgotten one thing. If it were an ominous sign, it would be a problem to see it. The dead dog, who was crouching on the warship, suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the distant permanent star, the expression in his eyes profound. Almost at the same time, Peng Lang suddenly grabbed the hilt of his sword in the battleship. Neither the immortal net used by the fairy nun nor the golden ring used by the godly master had elicited any reaction from them. What had they discovered? A few gazes fell on Peng Lang at the same time. Peng Lang stared at the dark space outside the window, feeling quite alert. He had discovered nothing. There was nothing in front of him. The dead dog saw nothing either. Yet, they had discovered an extreme danger in the void. There's nothing there, Yuan Chu exclaimed in surprise while looking at the flowing data on the light screen. Seeing the data on the terminal, Kane Yang shook her head in bewilderment. If the monitoring devices on the battleship and the spiritual awareness of the cultivation practitioners couldn't discover anything, there was only one explanation. There was nothing there. If so, why did the dead dog and Peng Lang act as if they were facing a formidable foe? Su Zai said expressionlessly, "We'll know once we try to find out what's playing tricks on us." As he spoke, he waved his hand to release a black banner. The black banner grew larger after it left the battleship, becoming a few kilometers long in an instant. It was soundless. The front end of the black banner drifted down and turned into nothingness. Soon after, the broken pieces extended backward and cut the black banner into pieces. Su Zai spat out a mouthful of fresh blood because his mind was wounded. "Retreat," Tong Yin said without hesitation. She grabbed Su Zai's collar and flew backward. Though Peng Lang's movement looked slow, he reacted very quickly. He reached out his right hand like a sword and dragged the heavy mechanical body of Shun Yunmai to the back of the battleship. Yuan Chu and Yushan retreated hand in hand. Kane Yang was the last to leave. The black banner had been completely broken. The battleship started to break apart. The window was broken into countless pieces of glass. The control panel was broken into countless pieces of metal. The black and white chess pieces set by Kane Yang were broken into the snow and the mud under the snow. Be it the hard super alloys or the magic treasures with immortal energy, they all shattered under the effect of that invisible force. It was soundless. There was nothing but breaking. It was not the plasma cannon, and it was not the cutting of the space. What was there in front of the quiet universe? Standing in the rear, Tong Yin and the others were stunned speechless when they saw the space of the battleship disintegrating. Chapter 989. The science and technology of the Federation of the Milky Way had improved twice in the last few years. Though they were only achievements in application, they still had a great impact, especially on those cocoon breakers. The superparticles of the nuclear power furnace allowed them to travel through the universe relatively freely, and the appearance of plasma cannons made them less powerful. The super micronuclear power furnace was used for the first time when General Li subdued Jin Shalai. The plasma cannon was used for the first time in the great battle in the galaxy beyond the foggy world. The bow of the Scorching Sun battleship was turned into nothingness by the plasma cannon. It seemed to be similar to what happened to the black battleship at the moment, but both Shin Yunmai and Tong Yin were certain that they were not the same thing. There was no sign of a large number of super particles in the empty space up ahead, nor was there any energy fluctuation. This was not the rumored defense system of the solar system, nor was it the space cut by the gravitational field. The force that made the battleship disappear was similar to the net of the fairy nun, but it was many times more formidable. The black battleship was gradually eroded by the invisible acid like an insect that had fallen into the net. But what was the material that made up the net? Why couldn't they sense it? As they were thinking of these questions, they had already retreated to the space outside the battleship. The black battleship kept on separating and disappearing in front of them until it became a part of the empty space in the end. More terrifyingly, it seemed that they were still on the same spot even though they were retreating rapidly. Would they be cut into pieces like the battleship and then disappear? Yuan Shu and Yushan held each other's hands tightly, a shocked and fearful expression showing on their faces. Standing side by side, Tong Yin and Kane Yang were calculating in silence. Su Zai remained reticent. Shen Yunmai was swearing profanely. Peng Lang stared at the empty space up ahead while stroking the hilt of his sword with a calm expression in his eyes. A sword light could be vaguely seen in the deep end, like the morning sun rising from the surface of the ocean. It's the sword wills hidden in heaven and earth. Come on up. A mild and steady voice suddenly rang out in everyone's spiritual awareness. The dead dog, who looked like a black mountain, had left the battleship a long time ago and floated up from below. Tong Yin and the others landed on his body and sank into the hair that was as tall as weeds. As their gazes passed through the hair and looked at the empty space, they finally saw something. It was the infinite sword intent hidden in the space. A cry of surprise suddenly came from the weeds. It was because the dead dog was walking forward. Nothing happened. Its footsteps seemed to have landed on the stars, slow and steady. Everyone was extremely nervous. Yushan covered his mouth, not daring to make a sound. The black dog looked at the star in the distance, and its warm eyes were filled with an inexplicable sense of pride. Its speed did not increase, and its footsteps did not pause. It was as if it had seen a hidden path in the omnipresent sword intent. Is that the path to the ancestral star? At this time, they had already guessed what the sword intent that permeated the entire solar system was. Thus, there was silence. It didn't take long for the tattered pirate ship to walk the same path as the black battleship. Chinya was at the very front, reaching out to catch some dust in space. He had just recognized it to be the debris of that battleship when a clear crack appeared on his finger. A golden light wrapped around his finger, preventing it from falling off. The heavenly immortals turned into 13 streaks of light and retreated behind the pirate ship. The tattered pirate ship was completely destroyed. It turned into a circle in the universe and then disappeared without a trace. Chunya gazed at the distant sun through the invisible sword wills, a worshipful expression showing on his face. This is the will of the Grandmaster. The heavenly immortals were stunned speechless. The Taoist immortals were deep in thought. Come with me. Chunya turned into a stone man 100 feet tall with a shake of his body. The heavenly immortals landed on his shoulders, and In Sheng landed on his head, raising his mechanical hand and pointing forward. Chunya sensed the distance and lifted his right foot slowly, taking a step forward. A huge black dog was walking in the dark space. A huge stone man was walking in the dark space. It was unclear how long he had been walking. The black dog suddenly disappeared. The stone man had also disappeared. The faint clouds were drifting in the sky. The clouds were much colder and more sparse, with many dust particles mixed in them. A huge black shadow tore through the clouds and appeared in the sky from a height of 300 meters, then landed on the ground. The ground quaked slightly, giving rise to a great deal of smoke and dust, which didn't settle down for a long time. Tong Yin and the others flew down from the back of the dead dog, looking around cautiously. This was a barren planet with an atmosphere and faint clouds, but no sign of water could be seen. It was evident that the clouds had nothing to do with water vapor. Looking at the sample on the light screen, Shun Yunmai said, "It's carbon dioxide. I know where it is." The place where they landed was a high mountain. The cliff was so high that they could see far away. Looking at the strange planet, Yuan Chu and the others wondered in astonishment if this was the ancestral planet. There was no green on the surface of this planet, and no sign of life could be found. It was a desert with only sand dunes and pebbles. A sandstorm could be vaguely seen in the distance, as well as the shadows of human buildings. How did the ancestors of the human beings survive in such a harsh environment? What had happened to the ancestral planet? This is not the ancestral planet, Tong Yin suddenly said. Shen Yunmai said with a smile. You people are so stupid. This is Mars. Yuan Shu and the others were taken aback, wondering what kind of place Mars was. Since it was a passage for the formation to transport them here, why did it bring them here? They and the immortals on the pirate ship had been shooting at each other from a distance of several thousand kilometers, and then they encountered the sword wills in the void. The battleship was cracked, and they were carried by the dead dog through the vast space of the universe, and then transported here. All of them were exhausted. After making sure that there was no danger on the surface of the planet, they sat on the ground and started to meditate. The dead dog walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the distant horizon. Peng Lang walked over and stood by his side. It didn't take long before Tong Yin opened her eyes, and the others woke up as well. Thinking of what Shen Yunmai had just said, Yuan Shu asked curiously, is Mars the name of this planet? It's simple and appropriate. The sand dunes and deserts on the surface of the planet reflected the sunlight from the horizon, giving off a feeling of being burned. Senior Master Zhao must like this place, said Yushan. He was referring to Zhao Liu. This mountain was very high, even higher than the Tingguang Peak in Aoyama. Standing at the edge of the cliff and looking down, an ordinary person would pass out immediately. Even though they were the immortals who had achieved some success in cultivation, they still felt astonished. This mountain is the highest mountain in the solar system. The huge robot walked slowly to the edge of the cliff and sat down, leaning against the body of the dead dog. The dead dog turned around to take a look, saying nothing. You don't regard me as an outsider, Suzai said as he walked over. The voice of Shen Yunmai rang out again. We are all members of the Aoyama sect, and you are the outsider. All of them came to the edge of the cliff, looking at the distant horizon from an altitude of 30,000 meters above the plain. In the next moment, the sun drifted up from the horizon. It was probably because of the atmospheric composition that the sun was light blue. Seeing this scene, Yuan Shu and Yushan clicked their tongues in wonder, which made Shen Yunmai mock them for being a country bumpkin. Kane Yang sat at the edge of the cliff while holding the terminal, calculating something with her head lowered. We can see it now, she suddenly said. Having said that, she pointed her finger at a spot in the western sky. The others followed her finger and saw another blue speck of light. That blue speck of light was smaller than Kei Nyang's fingernail, hovering in the sky in silence. They were all the immortals, so they could see many scenes in the distance. It was a tranquil planet. The blue one should be the ocean. The white one should be the clouds. They could even see the land under the clouds and the continuous green on the land, which should be a forest or a grassland. Looking at it from such a long distance, they could sense the freshness of nature on it. The sandstorm in the distance had faded away, and the heaven and earth grew quieter. Sitting on the high mountain and looking at the blue planet, they fell silent for a long time, feeling an indescribable thrill. That should be the ancestral planet. That blue planet was the cradle of the human civilization. The humans spent their childhood on it before they went to the Sea of Stars. What they didn't know at the moment was that the humans had already taken two paths when they went to the Sea of Stars. When the Sea of Dark Matter arrived, the gods had arranged two paths for them. They were reborn in the dark universe. They were accumulating energy in Chaotian. No matter how far they went, they had to remember where they came from. No matter how the times had changed and how the civilization had evolved, everything the humans had originated from there. I'd like to go there and have a look, Suzai suddenly said. Yuan Chu held Yushan's hand and said softly, I'll take you there. Kane Yang calculated the accurate data again and said, the distance between the ancestral planet and Mars is only a few 100 million kilometers. If we don't worry about the fairy energy running out, we can arrive there in a few dozen days. Suzai said, the young Master Shun should have that nuclear furnace in his spatial magic treasure. He does have it, but he won't take it out, said Shen Yunmai. It's because nobody can leave this place. Upon hearing this, everybody fell silent again. Kane Yang picked up a broken rock from the ground and flicked it toward the sky. She had liked playing chess since she was little, and she was even more obsessed with it than Tong Yen. She liked playing chess pieces when she had nothing to do. The chess pieces would make a sound when they hit anything. The broken rock was thrown toward the sky, but it seemed to have hit something hard, giving off a crisp paw sound. Then it shattered into powder and fluttered down. It was like the battleship that had passed by Pluto. The shapeless sword wheels that could cut everything in the world could be found here. The path toward heaven was like the blue sky, but it couldn't get out. It was because there was a cover in the sky. Yushan suddenly pointed to a black speck outside the atmosphere and said, "There's a satellite over there." "Is it called a satellite? Why did that satellite still exist?" "It's already broken," Peng Lang explained after a pause. "It looks fine, but it's broken into pieces peacefully." Kane Yang calculated some more data and showed it to the others. The sword wheels had extended all the way from the distant Kuiper belt to this place. Did it mean that the entire solar system was the same? It was shocking. "What the hell is this?" Suzai asked tersely. Peng Lang said softly, "It's a sword formation." Kane Yang and Tong Yen eyed each other and saw the seriousness in each other's eyes. Shen Yunmai maneuvered the robot and stuck up his middle finger at the distant blue planet. They had already guessed the truth, but Su Zai, Yuan Chu, and Yushan hadn't thought of that possibility yet. Peng Lang explained patiently, "This sword formation is unimaginably large. It has enveloped the entire solar system." Su Zai, Yuan Chu, and Yushan were shocked speechless. They looked at the outside of the atmosphere reflexively, trying to see the appearance of the sword formation. What kind of sword formation could cover an entire galaxy? Kane Yang operated the terminal and fetched a great deal of data. Finally, she simulated a picture and displayed it in the sky in front of the cliff. The picture was black, and the bright dot in the middle was the sun. Many planets were scattered around it, seemingly without any order. "This is Mercury, this is Venus, and this is the ancestral planet." Shen Yunmai pointed to those planets and explained to the others, "There are 8 planets in total, and they are arranged into a formation." What kind of formation were they arranged into? Soon, the others saw the formation. The seemingly irregular distribution of the planets actually had a vague shape. The 8 planets formed a cross in the vast universe, with a longer top and a shorter bottom, looking like a sword. The sun was the bright pearl inlaid at the bottom of the hilt. If it were a real sword, it would be the largest one since the birth of the universe. It became deathly quiet by the cliff's edge again. The sandstorm started again in the distance, covering the buildings built by human beings from an unknown period. The satellite outside the atmosphere suddenly started to disintegrate, and a puff of powder drifted up. It looked like a tower made of sand that was washed away by the seawater. After a long while, Tong Yen said, "I don't know how to describe what I've seen." His voice was still calm, but he couldn't conceal the weariness in it, indicating his true feelings at the moment. The Grand Masters of Aoyama used the sun as the pivot of the formation and the planets as the foundation, and the arrays as the swords. They used the gravitational force and the boundless space to generate the killing intent of heaven and earth. It was indeed remarkable. It was indescribably remarkable. Peng Lang praised, "How magnificent it is!" It was said that yesterday was the day when the earth was farthest from the sun. Then, there seemed to be a line of stars, which happened to be updated to this scene. It was quite a coincidence. Though it wasn't spectacular, it was quite interesting. Have a nice weekend, everybody. Chapter 990. The Grand Masters of Aoyama had cooperated with the young priest to eliminate the hidden swordsmen and the rebellious divine animals, and brought dozens of ascendants from Chaotian to the Federation of the Milky Way. As a result, the Federation of the Milky Way had developed at a high speed for almost 1,000 years. After that, he came to the ancestral star and began to live in seclusion. Jingjiu asked General Li, Tsingju, Chunya, and the others to deal with the war against the Sea of Dark Matter, the guidance of the Ascendants, and the cooperation with the praying hall. Jingjiu paid no more attention to the affairs of the mortal world until Jingjiu arrived. What had he been doing on the ancestral star for the past few hundred years? Return to the ancestral home of human civilization. Dig out the secrets that have been buried underground for hundreds of thousands of years. Find out what the childhood of human beings was like, and then find the path for the future of human beings. Of course, this was definitely something he wanted to do, but it was not necessarily everything he did. By now, people finally knew that he had spent hundreds of years transforming the solar system into a sword formation with the help of the female priest and the resources of the entire Federation of the Milky Way. No wonder this place had always been known as a forbidden area. Even those ascenders were not allowed to approach this place without permission. Then how do we get to this Mars? Yushan asked with his eyes wide open. I still don't know how the Grandmaster of Aoyama was able to build such a huge sword array, but since it's a sword array, it must be guarded. If there's an array pivot and base, there should be an array eye. If there's a death door, there must be a life door. Tong Yin said, Lord Knight Howler found the life door, so he brought us here. Shinyan Mai, Yuan Chu, Yushan, and Tong Yin had all learned the sword work of Aoyama, but they were far inferior to the dead dog's natural spiritual awareness of the sword formation of Aoyama. The group could not help but feel a little fearful when they heard that. If they did not bring an Aoyama ancestor with them, they would have been slashed into pieces by the sword formation along with the black warship. Yushan asked worriedly, That ship has also entered. The seniors probably don't know about the existence of this sword array. Will they be all right? Tong Yin said, The sword formation has been completed. Even the master of the formation can't move without permission. Anyone who enters will die. Xin Yunmai said in a mocking tone. With the two loyal dogs, Chunya and Insheng, he might not have the heart to kill them. Suzai asked, What should we do next? Since this Mars is where the gate of life is the exit also here? The deep and warm voice of the dead dog rang out. This sword formation has no exit. Hearing this, the edge of the cliff fell silent again. It was well known to all the cultivation practitioners in Chaotian that the living gate was available, but it didn't mean that they could leave. However, such a formation had never appeared in Chaotian. This was because the biggest problem with this kind of death array that isolated the inside from the outside was the position of the array master. If the master of the formation was outside the formation and wanted to control the operation of the formation, he would have to communicate with the inside of the formation. If there was a connection, there would be a passage. If the master of the formation was inside the formation, then wouldn't this death formation also trap him inside? If it was a normal spell formation, it could still be broken by brute force. However, the gigantic sword formation that spanned across the entire solar system, the Grandmaster of Aoyama had spent hundreds of years to set it up. Would he still need hundreds of years to break it? Nobody expected that the Grandmaster of Aoyama would actually do it. Why did the Grandmaster do it? Asked Yuan Chu bewilderedly. He imprisoned himself, said Xin Yunmai. Imprison himself? What did it mean? He imprisoned himself in the solar system, so he could imprison the whole world in the outer space. Xin Yunmai's voice was devoid of any emotion. People like us who are here to visit him have no way to leave. What he said was somewhat philosophical. But why did the Grandmaster of Aoyama want to turn the solar system into a prison from which no one could escape? Why did he imprison himself in it? It's because he was afraid that I would come and kill him. Xin Yunmai raised his thick mechanical arm toward the blue planet in the sky, as if he was ready to fire a weapon at any moment. The atmosphere by the edge of the cliff was rather depressing, but they couldn't help but react when they heard what he said. They all expressed their disdain for him. The Grandmaster turned the solar system into a sword formation. It's no different from a miracle. Why would he be afraid of you? Have you read too many ancient novels? Do you think all the patricide will succeed? It's more likely that the Grandmaster was afraid of Senior Master, but you? Hearing this, Xin Yunmai felt quite annoyed. Regardless of whether he was afraid of Jingjiu or the Snow Girl, he was still afraid of them. Tong Yin rubbed her eyebrows with her fingers and said tiredly, Since he could turn the solar system into a sword formation, he's qualified to be afraid of nobody. Shen Yunmai sneered. Why do you think the old man imprisoned himself then? Tong Yin stood up slowly and looked at the blue planet while supporting her waist with her hands. Then she turned her head to look at the other planets. After a moment of silence, she suddenly said, he intended to create another Chao Tian. Upon hearing this, everybody, including Shen Yunmai, fell silent. They vaguely felt that it might be the case. The solar system had turned into a magnificent sword formation, cutting off all the connections between the outside and the outside world, which was tantamount to being separated from the universe. Of course, it was not the real Chao Tian, but something similar. Did the Grand Master of Aoyama intend to create another refuge for the humans? Or did he intend to keep this ancestral home of the human civilization? Shen Yunmai shook his head expressionlessly and said, no matter how powerful this sword formation is, it can only block our universe. It was true. Judging from the effect of the shapeless sword wheels in the Kuiper Belt, this sword formation might not be able to block the sea of dark matter. There's still plenty of time. Everything is possible. Tong Yin fell silent for a while before saying, who could have thought that a solar system could be turned into a sword formation? I don't understand. Cake and Yang said softly, even if this sword formation could block the sea of dark matter in the future, what would happen to the other places 300 years later? Does the Grand Master intend to ignore the humans and live alone? Live alone forever? Shen Yunmai remarked mockingly. It's indeed something he would do. No, he intends to outlive Jingjiu to death. As for the Snow Girl, I don't know what he intends to do, said Tong Yin. Su Zai remarked icily. Are we going to be trapped here forever? Kane Yang tucked her hair behind her ears and said, this state won't last long. It was not the fault of the Grand Master of Aoyama. It was that they couldn't allow such a situation to happen. As long as the Snow Girl and Jingjiu were still alive, they would come to the solar system to kill the Grand Master. By then, they would probably be killed by this sword formation of the solar system or be imprisoned on this red planet like they had been. To prevent such a situation from happening, they had to find a way to dismantle this sword formation and go to the ancestral planet to kill the Grand Master in advance. However, the Life Gate was not the exit, but the place between life and death. Where could they go when this magnificent sword formation blocked the sky? Was it truly impossible to dismantle this sword formation that stretched across the solar system? No, there was nothing that couldn't be dismantled. Even a small piece of Jingjiu's earlobe had fallen off, to say nothing of the other objects in the universe. To dismantle a solid object, one had to know what it was made of first. To dismantle this sword formation of the solar system, one had to figure out the operating rules of the sword formation and how the mountain of the ancestors of Aoyama did it. Crouching by the cliff's edge, the black dog looked at the permanent star that had turned from blue to white in silence. Let's begin, said Tong Yin. Shen Yunmai uttered, and maneuvered the robot away from the dead dog. He walked to the cliff's rocks and unfolded a light screen. The information related to the defense system of the solar system appeared on the light screen. Soon after, many mathematical tools appeared in front of them in various forms. Kane Yang brought out dozens of small bronze mirrors and placed them around the mountain pass, forming a formation. The barren world devoid of the energy of heaven and earth suddenly had a sense of freshness. Shen Yunmai glanced at her appreciatively and then started his lesson. Different from the lessons on the Black Battleship, what he taught today was the history of the defense system of the solar system and the operating rules of the heavenly bodies in this world. The relevant data was changing on the light screen even faster than his voice. Kane Yang and Tong Yin stood in front of the light screen and listened attentively, asking questions once in a while. Standing a little further away, Su Zai furrowed his brows slightly while looking at the lines and functions on the light screen. It was unclear how much he had understood. Yuan Chu and Yushan stood further away. They were certain that they couldn't help Shen Yunmai, and their gazes were fixed on the sceneries on Mars. Peng Lang was the only one who didn't take a glance at the light screen from the beginning to the end. It was unclear what he was thinking about. Perhaps he didn't think about anything at all. It didn't take long before Tong Yin and Cain Yang reached the same conclusion as Shen Yunmai. After a while, Su Zai nodded in agreement. This super sword formation across the solar system must have been built on the original defense system of the solar system, but the source of its energy and the operating rules were completely different. The only force that could activate this sword formation and isolate the universe was the gravitational force between the sun and the heavenly bodies. These gravitational forces formed a kind of super space passage, which dispersed the spiritual awareness and sword wills of the grandmasters of Aoyama among the galaxies, and then caused some particles to scatter. But how could such a high-level energy be released? Standing in front of the light screen, Shen Yunmai controlled the mechanical arm to write all kinds of formulas and equations quickly. He proposed many possibilities, but they were all denied by Tong Yin soon. Then he came up with another idea, but Cain Yang found the problem in it. Time elapsed slowly. The distant sun didn't seem to move, and the thin air on the surface of Mars seemed to be frozen. The words and figures on the light screen appeared, and then were erased, resembling the podium in a university classroom. Standing in front of the podium, Shen Yunmai looked like a professor, but all his deductions were questioned by the students. His handwriting became more and more sloppy. Tong Yin and Cain Yang offered fewer and fewer opinions, but more and more suggestions. After a few days, the sloppy figures and words on the light screen were all gone, leaving only a function that looked simple but was actually quite complicated, or, more precisely, it was a conjecture about a function. Even Yuan Chu and Yushan could figure out some meaning from the form of this function, but it didn't mean that they had succeeded. By now, Shen Yunmai, Tong Yin, and Cain Yang were certain that if they wanted to deduce the working rules of this great formation without the accurate changes of the data, they would have to find a brand new method of deduction, which was a mathematical tool in the modern language. The problem was that even though they were the smartest people in this universe, they couldn't create a brand new mathematical tool in such a short time. They didn't even have a direction, not to mention any inspiration. Su Zai suddenly walked to the front of the light screen and waved his sleeve. Seeing this, Yuan Chu and Yushan, who were about to ask for leave, were startled, thinking that Su Zai had grown impatient and was about to make a fool of himself. Fortunately, nothing happened. The extremely complicated function on the light screen was still there quietly. What happened in the next moment was a bit miraculous. Thousands of soul fires came out from Su Zai's fingers and landed on the light screen. Those soul fires began to flicker according to the deduction process on the light screen, growing brighter and brighter. The atmosphere by the cliff's edge grew tenser. Everybody fixed their gazes on that spot. All of a sudden, those soul fires vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a small golden flower that looked like a candlelight. The numbers or formulas you used aren't wrong, but you're missing at least two very important points. Su Zai said tiredly as he retrieved the small golden flower. You're right. I think there's another problem in this problem. Looking at the numbers on the light screen, Tong Yin also found the problem. The sun was located in the center of the galaxy, and the 8 planets revolve around it, so it couldn't be silent. If the grandmasters of Aoyama wanted this great formation to last for at least hundreds of thousands of years, the eye of the formation couldn't be one of the planets. Then, where was the eye of the sword formation of the solar system? Maybe it was the missing number in this function. If only Master were here, Cain Yang sighed softly. Hearing this, Yushan nodded repeatedly. In their minds, no matter how difficult this function was to be solved, or even if the initial conditions were not complete, Jingjiu would be able to calculate it clearly as long as he had enough time. The eye of the formation is moving. A voice suddenly came out from the cliff's edge. It was Peng Lang who spoke. Shen Yunmai was about to taunt him, but he suddenly fell silent. If the eye of the formation was indeed moving, what would it be if it was not the 8 planets? A small planet? And it was a very inconspicuous meteorite? Since the key values were missing, and no suitable mathematical tools were available, there was only one way left, which was to observe it directly and then simulate the calculation. Tong Yin regulated her breathing for a while, and then lifted her head to look at the night sky without hesitation. What she saw was real. In an instant, his face turned pale beyond compare. King Yang took a magic pill and looked at the night sky bravely. A dozen breaths later, she drew back her gaze, a trickle of blood seeping out from the corner of her mouth. She shook her head apologetically as she met Shun Yunmai's gaze. A dozen breaths later, Tong Yin drew back her gaze and spat out a mouthful of blood. Yushan supported King Yang and infused the fairy energy into her body to treat her wound. Yuan Chu tossed a bottle of medicine to Tong Yin. Shun Yunmai remarked in a mocking tone, "You only know that you can spit out blood when you play chess, but it turns out you can also observe the stars. Do you have the ability to take a look at it?" Suzai demanded expressionlessly. Nobody could see through this great formation of the solar system, let alone see the direction and the approximate amount of the energy flowing in the great formation and find the moving eye of the formation. "I'll go and have a look." Peng Lang stood up and placed his right hand on the hilt of his sword. The dead dog stood up slowly and turned into a black mountain, blending into the dark universe. Chapter 991. The dead dog leapt up in the air and left the edge of the cliff, disappearing into the universe. Peng Lang also became a small dot of light in the universe and was soon covered by the invisible sword formation. Standing at the edge of the cliff, Tong Yin and the others sighed with emotion. "I knew Peng Lang was very powerful, but I didn't know he was so much more powerful than us," Suzai said with an unsightly expression. This sword formation was so terrifying that it was extremely difficult to even look into its depths, not to mention personally entering it while enduring the onslaught of sword intent. The dead dog was the principal guard of Aoyama. It was he who had found the life gate of this great formation and brought them to Mars. But what about Peng Lang? Tong Yin explained, "He has long achieved great success in swordsmanship, and he was personally taught by Zhenren Jingyang, so he has a strong tolerance for sword intent." Hearing this, Yuan Chu and Yu Shan looked at each other and felt ashamed. Suzai suddenly thought of a possibility and asked, "Is it possible that they found the ancestral planet directly and killed the Grandmaster of Aoyama?" Shin Yunmai's bored voice rang out. "What are you thinking about?" Kane Yang said softly, "When we were on the battleship, we learned about the history of the human civilization. It said that the human beings didn't have the ability to leave the ancestral planet during their childhood. They could only stay on the ground and observe the universe with a telescope. They were always thinking about leaving. Finally, they found a way to send out a few probes. That's right. These two fellows are probes. They might discover a new planet, but they might not return." Shin Yunmai's voice was emotionless. "But even if they were destroyed, they might still discover some of the laws of this universe. Lord Night Howler and Peng Lang are much stronger than those detectors. The possibility of them coming back is very high. Don't worry," Tong Yin said. "Let's continue with our own business. If they can really find a formation, we will complete the deduction and find a way to break the formation." The dozens of bronze mirrors floating in the sky reflected the faint light of the universe and illuminated the cliff. Kane Yang said softly, "I hope those seniors are all right. They have been on Mars for more than 10 days, both in Standard Time and Martian Time. The broken pirate ship still did not appear, nor did any immortals descend. One had to know that this was the only exit of the solar system sword formation. If Peng Lang and the dead dog couldn't stay in the sword formation for a long time, those ferrymen would have died already." Tong Yin, who was calculating behind her back, stopped and shook her head slightly. An inexplicable sense of sadness appeared on this mountain on Mars. Shin Yunmai said coldly, "Why are you thinking about those useless things? Hurry up and continue calculating." The research team on Mars continued with their work, but the two figures were missing from the cliff. Several more days passed, but the deduction was still not smooth. However, Everyone was increasingly certain that they needed a few key pieces of data. Suzai provided a few precious poison pills to boost Tong Yin and Cain Yang's spirits and speed up the circulation of their spiritual awareness. Xinyanmai was quite interested in this kind of thing. He extended his mechanical hand to the front of Suzai shamelessly. Suzai asked earnestly, "You don't have a body. How can you eat?" Xinyanmai said, "Turn it into water and disperse it into air. Smell it." Suzai was taken aback for a moment before saying, "It sounded a bit strange." The footsteps suddenly rang out at the foot of the cliff. They were light and fast, full of a cheerful feeling. Yushan and Yuan Chu were traveling back to Mars hand in hand. Yuan Chu pointed to a spot at the foot of the mountain and said, "That cluster of buildings is quite interesting. You can enjoy the scenery there. Do you want to go there?" Suzai threw the poison pill into the control room of the robot and said, "This place is the closest to the sky. Of course, they don't want to leave." "Yeah," Yushan said. "If Master Knight Howler and Peng Lang come back, we can receive them here." No sooner had he said this than a gust of strong wind rose on the surface of Mars. The bronze mirrors in the surrounding sky quivered slightly, giving off a pleasant sound, making the sunlight on the mountaintop mottled. The group was alarmed. They lifted their heads to look at the sky and saw a huge dark shadow approaching from outside the thin atmosphere. The great Grandmaster is back. Yuan Chu had been traveling on the surface of Mars with his wife these last few days. He was actually quite worried about the safety of the Master Knight Howler. Now that he was finally relieved, he shouted happily. Tong Yin raised her light eyebrows slightly. Her right hand that was in the middle of deducing paused slightly, feeling that something was not right. The bronze mirrors quivered even more violently, and the pleasant sound became a bit hurried, as if they were warning the others. By now, everyone had realized that something was wrong. If the huge dark shadow had come from the space, it wouldn't matter how fast it was, they would have enough time to react. However, the huge dark shadow seemed to have leaped out of the void and crashed toward the mountaintop from the sky. Who could react in time when it was more than 300 meters above the ground? The huge dark shadow turned out to be a mountain. In other words, it was a giant as big as a mountain. Countless horrifying airwaves and undisguised murderous intent crashed toward the ground along with the mountain. "Chunya!" someone yelled. Chunya, who had drifted in the sword formation of the solar system for more than 10 days, had finally found the exit and arrived at the surface of Mars. Then, he launched his most powerful attack without hesitation. With a loud bang, the majestic mountain shook violently, as if it was about to collapse. The earth shook uneasily, and countless cracks appeared. Even the plateau in the northwest direction was affected by this huge force, twisting and deforming. This was an unimaginable earthquake, bringing up countless sand and dust on the surface of Mars, forming the largest sandstorm in history. The terrifying sandstorm continued to howl, and the huge stone man could vaguely be seen kneeling on the edge of the cliff. His right fist had sunk deep into the cliff, as if he had become one with the tallest mountain in the solar system. The atmosphere of Mars was very thin, and even the most violent wind could not cause much damage. However, countless gravel and dust shot up, instantly blocking the dim light in the sky. The entire world became dark and chaotic. In the chaotic world, the whistling of the sandstorm was accompanied by muffled grunts, the sound of metal colliding, and a heavy explosion. Then, a cold sword light illuminated a corner of the sandstorm, and a magical treasure light shot into the distance. Before this, there were already several figures that were sent flying into the distance by the falling stone golems, disappearing into the sandstorm. The stone man of Chun Wu and Shan Shan dropped down from the sky with an indomitable determination and lethal intent, as well as the formidable magic method he had practiced 1,000 years ago and the fairy energy he had accumulated over hundreds of years. Such a formidable force was indeed hard to resist, especially for those newcomers who had just left Chaotian. The lighter the person was, the farther they would be knocked away. Yushan and Cain Yang were women. They turned into two flowing lights and were knocked to the bottom of the cliff 100 miles away. This place was the southwest corner of the circular mountain. The huge mountain blocked the dreadful sandstorm on the other side of the plateau, as well as a great deal of sunlight. Cain Yang and Yushan stood up amidst the dim and murky turbulence and found 3 figures among the distant rocks on the cliff. In the next moment, Cain Yang found Yuan Chu lying not far away, his chest covered in blood. Chunya's formidable energy and severe injury didn't make him let go of his wife's hand. The 3 figures in the distance drifted forward and arrived in front of them in an instant. The woman standing in the front had a gentle expression on her face, but the expression in her eyes was exceedingly cold. She wore a purple dress, looking gloomy and cold in the dim world. She didn't look like a fairy maiden, but a devil woman. Fairy Nunhi, young sister Yushan cried out in surprise, murmuring, "I used to like her a lot." Though her murmuring was heard by Fairy Nunhi, she said with the same expression, "Make it simple. Hurry up." Cain Yang took 1 step forward calmly and took out a bronze mirror with a flip of her right hand. Yushan pulled on her sleeve and said softly, "Let me go first." Yushan's cultivation talent was excellent among the regular cultivation practitioners, but she was not so outstanding in Aoyama. She had been favored and supported by her colleagues all the way from the South Pine Pavilion many years ago to the Shangda Peak and Shuriwa Peak. As a result, she was lucky enough to ascend successfully. No matter how one looked at her, she was no match for Fairy Nunhi. It was unclear why she volunteered to fight. Cain Yang was hesitant. An impatient expression showed on Fairy Nunhi's face. Cain Yang stepped back, and a beam of light shot out from the mirror in her right hand, shining in front of Yuan Chu. Yuan Chu's face was no longer as pale as before. Looking at his wife walking forward, he wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Nothing unexpected happened in this fight. Yushan's flowing snowy sword style had no chance to exert its power in front of the invisible and seemingly omnipresent huge net. Countless snowflakes drifted down, and her body seemed to be grabbed by an invisible huge hand and thrown toward the steep cliff. A small black hole appeared on the cliff wall, and there was a blood stain at the entrance of the hole. She didn't know how deep she was in the mountain, and it was unknown whether she was dead or alive. This is a magic treasure of the immortals called the Dream Butterfly. If Yushan didn't like her and found its origin in the books, I wouldn't have known about it either. Yuan Chu called out the plum sword and propped himself up. He said to Cain Yang, "This magic treasure looks like a net, but it's actually a magic treasure of heaven and earth, and it's the way of cloud and dream. You have to be careful." For some reason, his countenance was quite calm, as if he wasn't worried about Yushan's safety. What he said sounded like a reminder for Cain Yang to fight, but it was actually an order. Cain Yang understood what he meant, so she didn't move. "Senior Master, please." Yuan Chu bowed to her, and then wielded his sword. The gray sword turned a few times in the night sky, and arrived in front of the fairy maiden, along with a great deal of wind and snow. It looked like the 7-plum sword style of Shuriwa Peak, but it was actually the will of the endless sword style of Qingrong Peak, but it had the cold energy of the flowing snowy sword style. The expression on the fairy maiden's face changed slightly, as she didn't expect this junior to have such a high level of sword work despite his low cultivation state. The snowflakes dancing on the dark cliff walls were not the snowflakes made of water, but dry ice. The coldness here was much stronger than in Chaotian and other places. A buzzing sound like the chirping of cicadas faded away, and the invisible and net-like energy was frozen by the flowing, snowy sword style. "Pa! Pa!" The sound of zither strings breaking rang out. Yuan Chu seized the moment when the net was broken and drifted away with his sword, a dozen bright sword wills coming out from his sleeves. The fairy maiden's eyes beamed as she exclaimed, "The shapeless sword body?" As she spoke, she had already leapt up in the air, and a patch of white cloud appeared where her feet landed. He did not know how this kind of Dermic Dao could be used on Mars. The cloud traveled leisurely, and there was a profound meaning to it. Seeing the curved flying sword breaking through the net and the figure of the sword light approaching along with the wind and snow. The fairy maiden he didn't show any fear and reached out her jade-like white palm. Huh! The two palms joined together gently. The wind and snow outside the cliff stopped for a moment and then closed up quickly. The snowflakes seemed to turn into butterflies, flying to the center of her palm and turning into something like a snowball, catching the sword light easily. Holding the snowball in her hands, she looked like a sea girl holding a huge pearl. The snowball hit Yuan Chu's chest precisely in the midst of those sword lights. Boom! The snowball suddenly dispersed with a deafening boom, turning into tens of thousands of white butterflies that disappeared in the void. Yuan Chu was sent flying to the wilderness over 100 miles away, falling to the ground in an arc. Along the way, something like golden flowers dripped down. He must have been spitting out blood. The fairy maiden, he withdrew her gaze and said to Cain Yang while standing in midair, "You're still too weak. I hope you won't disappoint me." Hearing the fairy maiden he's words, Cain Yang's expression didn't change at all. She waved her hand, releasing hundreds of extremely small, round bronze mirrors. Some of the bronze mirrors had obvious cracks, and some were even chipped. They were severely damaged. They must have been damaged by Chun Ya's attack from beyond the heavens. Cain Yang's cultivation state was above that of Yuan Chu and Yushan, and her temperament was as calm as still water and as clear as a mirror. She was aware that the two fights between Yushan and Yuan Chu were for her to watch. As the three weakest members of the team, even if they couldn't defeat these immortals of the previous generation, they had to do something. These round bronze mirrors were what she had prepared after watching the two fights. It was a formation. Looking at the bronze mirrors in the sky, the fairy maiden, he said disappointedly, "Oh, it's the mirror sect. It's not that interesting." No sooner had she finished speaking than she arrived among the bronze mirrors in the sky. She reached out her hand to pluck countless extremely cold cloud threads, intending to break the formation. All of a sudden, the white cloud threads reflected by the bronze mirrors also turned white. The bronze mirrors that didn't reflect the cloud threads looked black in this gloomy world. This was not the formation of the mirror sect. It was the black and white chess method invented by Cain Yang. Do your best, students taking the college entrance examination tomorrow. Even if you're not a genius like Tong Yin, you can still make continuous progress like Cain Yang. Chapter 992. Innumerable opposing but interconnected intents filled with murderous intent were moving back and forth among the bronze mirrors that had turned into black and white chess pieces. The white cloud under Fairy He's feet was suddenly shattered, and her dress was also torn. She pounced toward the ground with an indifferent expression. The other two immortals of the previous generation saw this scene from afar, and their expressions changed slightly. They rushed over as fast as they could. Pa! 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 Sounds of breaking like a rainstorm could be heard in front of the gloomy cliff. The bronze mirrors in the sky kept breaking, and so did the wisps of cloud. Cracks appeared on Fairy He's dress, black hair, and even her body. She came to Cain Yang the moment all the bronze mirrors in the sky were broken into pieces. Countless golden blood seeped out from under her dress and began to burn in the air, illuminating a corner of the cliff. It was true that Cain Yang's black and white chess method was formidable, and it could even subdue Gu Shijiu's Taoist magic. However, Cain Yang was not an ordinary cultivation practitioner. At the most crucial moment, she managed to win the game by relying on her abundant fairy energy. But somehow, she didn't kill Cain Yang. The two immortals flew to the field and were confused at the scene, wondering why Fairy He didn't kill Cain Yang, because she had always been domineering and cruel. Your chess art is similar to my heaven and earth of the Dharma. What's your relationship with Yimeng? Fairy He asked. Cain Yang wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. Then she combed her messy hair behind her ears with a flame and said softly, "I learned Go from Child Tong Yin, but I have nothing to do with Zhongzhou School. My teacher is Immortal Jingjiu." An amused smile appeared on Fairy He's lips, and she said, "Since you refuse to lie, you've won the bet. She and Zhongzhou School were both from Yunmeng, but she had a deep hatred with the ancestors of the Bai family. If Cain Yang had misunderstood her intention and wanted to establish a relationship with Zhongzhou School, she would have been killed by her. Having said that, she pointed at the cliff and grabbed the unconscious Yushan from the deep part of the mountain. The other two immortals also brought back the unconscious Yuan Chu from the distant plain. Nani looked at the two unconscious people and asked in confusion, how did these two guys ascend? In her opinion, Cain Yang's cultivation state was still far from that of an immortal, but her Taoist magic art level was very high. Compared to these two, the difference was even greater. Cain Yang explained softly, it is not as difficult to ascend from Chao Tian as it used to be. Nani's expression changed slightly as she asked, then you should know that an old man like me is much stronger than you, yet you're still willing to throw away your life. Cain Yang said calmly, as I said earlier, Jingjiu is my master. The lightest person was shaken the farthest, and the heaviest person was naturally the closest. The most important thing in the ancestral assassination team was not the person, but the robot. It was shaken off the cliff and fell into the wilderness of the ring-shaped mountain, creating a huge pit. Its left mechanical arm was severely deformed. His appearance, which was not good to begin with, was now one step closer to trash. The cliffs of the crater blocked the light, and the wilderness was also dark. A black-robed Taoist walked out from the darkness like a ghost. It was Sword Immortal Ensheng. Ensheng walked to the front of the pit and asked expressionlessly, what are you? The robot was trying to dig up the broken rocks around it to bury itself, but it had no choice but to stop when it suddenly found Sword Immortal Ensheng appeared by the edge of the pit. The scene was full of helplessness and absurdity. In fact, Xin Yinmai was indeed Xin Yinmai. When the bronze mirrors in the sky gave the warning, he reacted the fastest and turned around to flee. The direction in which he fled, the judgment of the sandstorm, and the idea of burying himself were all marvelous. Unfortunately, his response was too accurate and marvelous, which was why he was targeted by the strongest swordsman of the opposing team. Since it had come to this, he didn't bother to say anything more. He directed the undamaged mechanical arm to aim at Sword Immortal Ensheng by the edge of the pit. Along with the sizzling sound of electric current, the mechanical arm extended its middle finger. The Sword Immortal Ensheng tilted his head slightly and looked at the broken robot at the bottom of the pit. For some reason, he had a familiar feeling about it. In the next moment, he raised his mechanical arm and pointed his middle finger at the robot, indicating that he had the same feeling. The robot turned its mechanical arm clumsily and stiffly toward the top of the cliff wall of the crater, indicating that it would wait for them to finish the fight. The fight on the cliff wall went on splendidly, and it ended quickly. Countless soul fires and greenish demonic flames were flying in the sky, looking extremely domineering, but they were suppressed by an extremely pure fairy energy. That fairy energy was not affected by the change of the energy of heaven and earth. On the contrary, it seemed to be more dreadful because of the sandstorm. It was unclear which sect the Grandmaster belonged to. Su Zai fled along the crater, but he couldn't escape with the help of the sandstorm. In the end, he returned to his original spot. Senior, please stop. He halted his steps and raised his hands without hesitation. This junior admits defeat, he said while looking at that fairy immortal. That fairy immortal had a handsome face and a fluttering fairy energy, as if he would illuminate this dim world. He had a horsetail whisk on his arm, but it didn't look like a Taoist magic treasure. Each strand of the horsetail whisk seemed to contain a great deal of moisture, as if a rainstorm could fall at any moment. Looking at the remnant energy of the demonic flames behind Su Zai, he said in a deep voice, "You're indeed a devil man of the deviant sects." Su Zai didn't like what he said. "I'm from the external sect of Aoyama. How can you be a devil man of the deviant sects?" The fairy immortal asked solemnly, "What banner did you use earlier? What demonic method did you use?" "You used a magic treasure and a magic method to judge the good and evil," Suzai pointed at the two black-clothed devil immortals behind him and sneered. Aren't they much more deviant than me? Pooh! Along with this poo, he spat out a large mouthful of blood. The blood ignited along with the wind and turned into black and gold, looking full of demonic intent. While wiping off the blood, Suzai glanced at a place not far away stealthily. Shinya had returned to his normal size. He stood by the cliff's edge with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the world full of sandstorms. It was unclear what he was looking at. No matter how violent the wind on Mars was, it couldn't ruffle the large cloak behind him. Another fairy immortal stood behind him expressionlessly while holding a huge sword, looking like a bodyguard. Suzai recognized Shinya, and he also knew that this fairy immortal with a huge sword should be the legendary Taoist woman who had killed Nanning. He gave up on the idea of sneak attacking him. It was true that he was beaten badly by the fairy immortal with the horsetail whisk, but he didn't suffer an irreparable wound. The reason he circled back to his original spot was to see if he could take advantage of the situation. It turned out that it was 1 against 5. How could he take advantage of the situation? Was there anyone worse off than him? Shinya stood by the cliff's edge. The large cloak hung down to his heels. He didn't turn around to take a look at Suzai. The Master Yin never needed anyone to worry about him. A few seconds later, Suzai's grunt could be heard behind him, followed by countless profanities and another grunt. Shinya looked at the surface of Mars expressionlessly, thinking of many things. Where did that dog go? Where did that person named Penglang go? Why wasn't Lu Shui here? Why hadn't Zhao Liu come? After passing through the Kuiper Belt and that inauspicious small planet and entering the magnificent sword formation of the solar system, he sensed the will of the Grandmasters. He felt more confident and powerful than ever before, even more so than when he ascended. In order to deal with these newcomers from Chaotian, he and his companions had made many arrangements, but they had already won all the battles even though they hadn't used many of them yet. All of a sudden, a peculiar glint flashed in his eyes. The sandstorm was subsiding slowly, and the cracks on the ground were being filled up like the cracks on his right fist that were closing up. Standing on the highest mountain, one could see many places on Mars like the valley. The valley was darker than other places, but a few glows of light could be seen once in a while. The expression on Chunya's face changed slightly, as he wondered if the battle was not over yet. Among the fairy immortals who came to the solar system this time, the fairy swordsman Ensheng, Chunya, the godly battering master, and the fairy nun had the highest cultivation state and the strongest prowess. As such, he and Ensheng were responsible for attacking the top of the mountain, and the godly battering master and the fairy nun would each lead a team. It was the godly battering master and the other 2 colleagues who were in the valley at the moment. What they needed to deal with was merely that Tong Yin and one Tong Yin. Tong Yin stood alone in the deep end of the valley. According to Xin Yun Mai, this valley was not the deepest place on Mars. The deepest valley was the most magnificent in the entire solar system. However, this valley was deep enough that no light could be seen, and even the sandstorm couldn't affect it. He turned to look at the 3 fairy immortals pursuing him, blinking his eyes. He had thought of many things during the time he was blinking his eyes. The early warning formation set up by Kane Yang on the top of the mountain made him less vigilant, so he didn't make enough calculations. Otherwise, these fairy immortals wouldn't have caught him unprepared even if they could conceal the heavenly secret. The real problem was that the huge sword array that spanned across the solar system made his Tao heart a little unstable. The hopeless future was even longer and gloomier than the underground tunnel at the bottom of Cloud Dream Mountain. Since it had happened, he had to deal with it. Your companions must have something to do with the Aoyama sect, so they won't die. However, you were the sect master of Zhongzhou School when you ascended. It's a pity. The gray-haired fairy immortal in a colorful robe said regretfully while looking at him. Tong Yin fixed his gaze on the small drum tied to the old fairy immortal's wrist. After confirming his identity, he said expressionlessly, "Senior Shun Bao, please." Chinya turned into a mountain and crashed toward Mars with a dozen fairy immortals on his back. His power was unimaginable. The largest sandstorm in history occurred on the surface of Mars, not in terms of the area it covered, but in terms of its intensity. Fortunately, this sandstorm wasn't formed naturally, so it dissipated quickly. It didn't take long for the dust particles that had been swept away by the wind to descend to the foot of the mountain. The view on the top of the mountain gradually became clearer. The sword immortal and Shang carried the robot to the cliff's edge and threw it down from the sky. Along with a clattering sound, the robot became even more tattered. Female immortal He and the other two fairy immortals returned to the cliff's edge with Cain Yang and the unconscious Yuan, Chu, and Yushan. Their expressions changed slightly when they saw the robot. Su Zai was in the worst condition. He was tied up by the fairy master Yun with a horsetail whisk, half hanging in the air, black blood oozing out from his body. The black blood ignited as it fell to the ground. The smoke from the melted rocks and sand reached his face, making him cough incessantly. Crack, crack, crack. The tattered robot stood up shakily. Seeing Su Zai's terrible condition, he laughed out loud. Is this a bloodletting, a raindrop, or a smoked meat? Su Zai was on the verge of death. Hearing this, he braced himself and cursed. If I hadn't helped you, I wouldn't have ended up like this. An angry voice came out from the robot. How dare you say that? I went to Chaotian to find you people to help me, but I got nothing in return. The sandstorm retreated to a farther place, and the sun could finally be seen, but it was still dark and cold on the cliff's edge. Hearing the voice, female immortal, he thought the voice was familiar. Staring at the tattered robot, she asked tersely, Who are you? You can't even tell who I am? You old fellows really have bad eyesight. The laughter full of mockery came out from the tattered robot. Hearing these words and laughter, Auntie Hsien and the other immortals were instantly reminded of many bad memories, and their expressions became very ugly. Even the expression in the eyes of the sword fairy In Sheng had changed. Little Shun, young Master Shun, Yunmai, how did you end up like this? When Shun Yunmai learned the story of Jue Xiao, the personal disciple of Tong Yin, he remarked sentimentally that Jue Xiao's life was similar to his own. It was not a narcissistic statement. It was a fact. He had been a genius in various aspects since he was a child, and he had received the education from the most outstanding figures in various fields in the Federation of the Milky Way. Naturally, there would be many ascenders among the teachers. All the immortals present had gone to the old house of the Shun family to teach him. The Devil Brothers in black clothing had accompanied Shun Yunmai for a whole year when he was 3 years old. Those experiences were interesting for Shun Yunmai, but they were terrible for these immortals. It was because Shun Yunmai was too smart and too proud, and he had a bad temper, especially after he became an adult. However, he was, after all, the only descendant of the Grandmaster of Aoyama, and he was recognized as the successor of this civilization by everyone. He was the kid that they had taught. 2 years ago, Shun Yunmai suddenly disappeared, which aroused a lot of speculation. Some seniors who liked him, such as the immortal He, felt sad. Who would have thought that he would suddenly appear here, together with those people? Shinya asked, Have you had enough? Shun Yunmai replied indifferently, I don't talk to stone men. The immortal He flew to the front of the robot, turned to look at Chunya, and asked in a cold voice, What's going on here? Chunya said, as In Sheng said, We're the ones who seek victory, so nothing else matters. The problem is that you haven't won yet. A childish voice rang out outside the cliff. The reason why that voice sounded a little childish was because it was filled with certainty and confidence that no one knew where it came from. A crack appeared in the sky outside the cliff, and Tong Yin walked out from it. He was holding a small bell in his left hand, but it was not the famous scenic cloud bell of Zhongzhou School. It was an ancient bell full of complicated patterns, with a hint of sharpness. His right hand was hanging by his side. As his fingers moved slightly, 2 semi-conscious immortals drifted out from the crack, as if they were connected by invisible ropes. Chapter 993. The two immortals were unconscious, and it was evident that they were severely wounded. Seeing this scene, the people on the cliff were shocked to the extreme. Even the fairy sword Unshin couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. A patch of seven-colored cloud drifted over at a high speed from the foot of the cliff a few miles away. Standing on the cloud, the godly master striking master warned anxiously, "Watch out. This lad is much more powerful than we thought." He was indeed an experienced ferryman with a high cultivation state. Having said that, he returned to the top of the cliff, looking at Tong Yin as if he was facing a formidable foe. On the dilapidated pirate ship, the immortals had discussed how to deal with these juniors. They had made arrangements for Zhao Liu and Lu Shui, but they didn't pay any attention to Tong Yin. Both the book, The Path Toward Heaven, and other information indicated that this person had unparalleled intelligence, but his cultivation state was rather ordinary. Even though he was the sect master of Zhongzhou School before his ascension, Zhongzhou School had been suppressed by the Aoyama sect in Chaotian, so how powerful could he be? Who would have thought that their deductions and judgments would be so wrong? You are indeed the former leader of the orthodox sections. The resources of Cloud Dream Mountain are still there, said the Taoist Tao Seeker, while holding the huge sword while looking at Tong Yin with interest. With a sneer, the fairy maiden, he said, "It's not the resources of Zhongzhou School, but the spirit of the Aoyama sect." Reminded by her, the immortals fixed their gazes on the small bell and realized that the sharp intent was actually the purest sword wills of Aoyama. By now, they realized that Tong Yin was a genius of the center sect and had been cultivating in the Aoyama sect for many years. How could she not be powerful when she had the prowess of the two most powerful sects? "My young friend, you're indeed more powerful than we thought," the ferryman named Master Yun said to Tong Yin with a mild expression. "But it's hard to support a single tree. Why do you force yourself?" By now, Kanyang had noticed the bloodstains on Tong Yin's clothes, but they looked like glowing spots under the distant sunlight. In the battle in the dark and gloomy valley, he had used so many tricks that the godly master striking master was overwhelmed. As soon as he realized what was going on, he had subdued the two immortals with his magic. In order to pursue speed and victory, he had given up a lot and suffered a great deal of damage. Rubbing his eyebrows tiredly, he said, "But I think we can talk now." They were suddenly ambushed and were about to be completely defeated, but he managed to severely injure two immortals in an impossible way and took their lives in his hands. It was like a player on a chessboard who saw that his side had lost the advantage, but he found a treasure in an inconspicuous corner. At the very least, he gained some breathing space. The meaning of this sentence was very clear. If the immortals of the previous generation insisted on not negotiating with them, then the two immortals would naturally die. Chinya looked at him in silence, his face expressionless. He didn't even intend to speak. Shun Yunmai's voice rang out from the robot. "The Great Way is merciless. Moreover, their leader is a stone man. He won't negotiate with us, and he won't let us go." Tong Yin fell silent for a while, as if he was considering the truth of Shun Yunmai's words. Then he asked, "What should I do now?" Shun Yunmai said, "Kill the two immortals you've captured, then run away as far as you can." Tong Yin agreed, his finger moving slightly. Everybody could sense the murderous intent overflowing from his fingertip. More terrifyingly, the connection between the finger and the spiritual souls of the two immortals was being cut off. No matter how fast the immortals were or how powerful their divine awareness was, they couldn't cut off the connection. The immortals fell silent when Tong Yin and Shun Yunmai started their conversation because they didn't want their Tao hearts to be affected. But they didn't expect that Shun Yunmai would order Tong Yin to kill them without hesitation after Chunya expressed his unwillingness to negotiate. And Tong Yin actually dared to kill them, even though he knew that they would be buried together with the two immortals in the end. Why did he do that? Why were the younger generations so ruthless? Stop it. It was at the most tense moment that a voice rang out on the cliff. The deity battering master, the cloud master, Kane Yang, and the others all heaved a sigh of relief. The person who spoke was immortal Nun He. Tong Yin accepted the advice readily. His fingers stopped moving, as steady as an old pine tree, and his murderous intent was withdrawn. Immortal Nun He looked at Chunya expressionlessly and demanded, "Are you mute?" Chunya said after a moment of silence, "They'll all die eventually." It was true. Even if Kane Yang, Su Zai, and the others regained their freedom, they couldn't leave the Mars. Where could they go? They were severely wounded, so they couldn't withstand the attacks of these immortals of the previous generations. They would still die. Given Tong Yan's wisdom and resourcefulness, he would certainly propose more outrageous conditions. And Chunya wouldn't accept any conditions that could make them break free from his control. Following the will of the Great Grandmaster, he wouldn't allow these people to affect the Great Formation. Since it was a matter of life and death, there was no need to complicate matters in the middle. Immortal Nun, he understood what he meant, saying, "As you said, they can't run away anyway. Let's give them some time so that I can figure out something." Master Yin thought of something and put Su Zai down from the sky. After a moment of silence, Tong Yin let go of the two severely wounded immortals and walked toward the cliff while carrying Su Zai, who was covered in blood. Nobody, including Chunya, had expected that he didn't propose any conditions. They all felt surprised. Waving her hand at Immortal Nun He, Kane Yang brought the unconscious Yuan Chu, Yushan, and Tong Yin to a corner. Tong Yin turned around and said, "You may begin." Immortal Nun He turned to the robot and asked icily, "What's going on?" Along with the buzzing sound of the motor, the control room in the middle of the robot opened, revealing a head covered in oil stains. It was Shun Yunmai. Even though they had guessed what was going on, the immortals of the previous generations were still startled to see the scene. "Greetings, uncles and aunties." Shun Yunmai greeted the crowd courteously, saying, "The thing is the old man intended to kill me. No, his method was even more ruthless and cruel. He intended to turn me into a living dead person in a coffin. But I'm quite capable and managed to escape from the coffin. As such, I came here to seek revenge." "It's not logical," said Shinya expressionlessly. "The Great Grandmaster wants to exile you because you're a friend of Jingjiao. And the Great Grandmaster wants to deal with Jingjiao for the sake of the humans." Shin Yunmai retorted, "What the humans do has nothing to do with me. You are all the immortals who have achieved the Tao. Why do you have so many obsessions in the mortal world?" All of us have thought about this question many times. Guzwa wiped the dust off his face with his black sleeve and said with a sigh, "If we leave Chaotian and ascend and become a ferryman, we can at least live for tens of thousands of years with the inexhaustible fairy energy provided by the permanent star. However, if the sea of dark matter occupied our local galaxy a few hundred years later, where would we be able to go? Would we drift in the endless universe until the end of time?" The fundamental problem was that the universe was too vast and the speed of light was too slow. The ferrymen who have nowhere to go are no different from the rocks. The person who said this was the Great Grandmaster, his gray hair tousled by the gentle wind on the top of the mountain, looking rather experienced. It was quiet on the top of the highest mountain in this solar system for a while. "I have nothing to say about the matter between you and your father," said the immortal mistress, he while looking at the head of Shin Yunmai. "But why do you support Jingjiao?" "Jingjiao is my friend," said Shin Yunmai contentedly. The immortal mistress he let out a bitter smile and said nothing. Then she turned to Tong Yin and the others and asked, "Why do you support Jingjiao then? I don't quite understand it." "If it's because of the relationship between the two masters, the Great Grandmaster is the Great Grandmaster of Aoyama. Shouldn't you obey his will?" Yuan Chu and Yushan had already woken up. They were sitting against the cliff rocks with pale faces. Hearing this, they couldn't help but smile. From a South Pine Pavilion to the inherited sword competition, and then to the Shinma Peak, they had experienced so many years and memories. How could the portrait in front of the small building be compared to them? "We don't know you, nor do we know the Great Grandmaster of Aoyama." Tong Yin said, "As for whose path is correct, him or the immortal Jingyang, I don't know either. If so, why do you follow his path? Asked the immortal mistress he. Tong Yin replied, because the path of the great grandmaster of Aoyama is for the immortal Jingyang to die, and we know he probably won't die. The great grandmaster of Aoyama and the ferrymen of the previous generations believed that igniting the stars with the all-in-one sword was the only way to save mankind. This method would kill Jingjiu, but Jingjiu definitely wouldn't die. As such, this method must be wrong. This reasoning sounded a little messy, but when one thought about it carefully, it made a little bit of sense. Of course, it was based on the premise that Jingjiu wouldn't die no matter what happened. The immortal Jingyang has never been defeated in either his previous or current life. Even if he made a mistake, he won't die. All of Chaodian knows how much he fears death. Tong Yin continued, our confidence in him is probably the same as your confidence in the great grandmaster of Aoyama. Shun Yunmai concluded, the winner is not the righteous one, but the truth. There is no truth in this universe. It's because everybody will die, but whoever can live longer will be the truth in different stages. Right now, we and you are standing on different principles. Let's see who can survive and prove it. The immortal mistress, he said softly after some thought, different paths. Let's fight then, said Shin Yunmai. You have already lost, said Chunya expressionlessly. Shin Yunmai retorted, how could that be? To say nothing of the fact that Jingjiu is still alive and Zhao Lu hasn't arrived yet. You guys are lucky to have successfully sneak attacked him. Chinya's hand had been hidden in the large cloak the entire time. It was unclear what he was holding in his hand. Do you mean the dead dog and Peng Lang? Shin Yunmai said, even if Peng Lang were the only one here, you guys would have no chance of winning. No sooner had he said this than the shapeless barrier in the atmosphere suddenly changed its shape. Along with a gust of wind, someone fell down from a sky 300 meters high and landed heavily on the ground. That person wore an ordinary cloth that was in tatters, and an ordinary sword was sheathed at his waist. Peng Lang had arrived when he was talking about him. The sword formation of the great grandmaster is indeed formidable. We can't go deep into it, and we can't find the eye of the formation either. I can't hold on any longer, so As Peng Lang spoke, he suddenly found that the situation in the cliffs was out of place. Compared to when he had left more than 10 days ago, there were many more people here, and they seemed to be his enemies. His face was a bit pale. It was not because he was frightened, but because he had fought against the huge sword formation across the solar system. He might have even been wounded. The cliffs were unusually quiet. All of a sudden, a gust of wind blew over and fluttered Chinya's cloak. Seeing this, Tong Yan's expression changed slightly. How could the thin air and weak wind blow the cloak? Chinya's hand was exposed. He held a stone pestle tightly in his hand, and his remaining 2 fingers seemed to sink into the rough surface of the stone. What was even more eye-catching was that there was an azure rope of light wrapped around the stone pestle, exuding an extremely faint yet extremely serene aura. It was the sword will, but it seemed to be the opposite of the sword will. Peng Lang didn't notice the stone pestle and the green rope of light in Chinya's hand, because he was surrounded by the 2 black-clothed demon immortals. It was true that the 2 black-clothed demon immortals were only 2 people. They stood in front of him and behind him, but it seemed that they had surrounded the entire space around him. They were even looking in different directions and didn't spare a glance at Peng Lang. 2 faintly discernible auras with diametrically opposite temperaments drifted out from the black-clothed demon immortals, forming a natural and harmonious formation. Peng Lang raised his eyebrows slightly. He took a step forward with some interest, and his figure suddenly passed through. Seeing this, the expressions of the 2 black-clothed demon immortals changed slightly, and Guzwa even let out a cry of surprise. What came next was Xianu's invisible net and Master Yun's myriad strands of clouds. Then, the sound of drums suddenly rang out, and countless golden rings reverberated between the cliffs. In the blink of an eye, the 5 immortals unleashed their most powerful formation in an attempt to trap Peng Lang. Peng Lang still didn't draw his sword. He just continued to step forward. The wind blew at his sleeves, bringing with it countless sword lights. But the sword lights suddenly disappeared, taking him through the immortal magic treasures and formations like an immortal or a phantom. This wasn't a shapeless sword body, nor was it an escape technique of heaven and earth. It was a technique that was somewhat similar to the Nether Fairy sword. To be more precise, this was a sword escape technique inherited from Nanchu's ghost sword. The immortals were extremely shocked that such a formation could not trap a junior, and they all cried out in surprise like Guzwa. Hishianu, Master Yun, the deity, striking grandmaster, and the two black-clothed demon immortals were not ordinary cultivators, and their immortal magic treasures and formations were extremely powerful. After passing through the layers of encirclement, Peng Lang's face became even paler, and his figure also became slightly sluggish. Then, he saw the stone pestle falling toward him. At this moment, Peng Lang finally raised his sword, but was upside down. The sword hilt and the stone pestle met soundlessly, and a sound wave brighter than lightning rang out. The terrifying wave of air swept up the dust on the ground and sprayed wildly in all directions. In just a few breaths' time, it had spread over a radius of several dozen miles. Right in the middle of the circular wave of dust, not even the thinnest air existed. It was even more vacuum than the universe. The stone pestle didn't shatter, and neither did the ordinary sword hilt. Only a green rope of light was floating in the air like an extra thread, and it made one feel slightly uncomfortable. Peng Lang was slightly alarmed. His fingers turned slightly, and he was about to grab the sword hilt and cripple Chunya. The green rope of light suddenly moved at a high speed and tied his hand that was holding the sword hilt as fast as lightning. Then it coiled twice around his neck and tied the tip of his sword. It was a weird scene. Peng Lang seemed to be holding a bow and tying the bowstring across his neck. It also seemed that he was about to commit suicide. Seeing this scene, Yuan Chu and the others cried out in surprise. Tong Yin had a grave expression on her face, and Shun Yunmai cursed. What kind of magic treasure was this green rope of light? How could it tie Peng Lang's sword? This is the new sheath prepared for you by the Grandmaster. Take a look and see if it's suitable for you, Chunya said through his spiritual awareness while staring into Peng Lang's eyes. The sheath of the inherited heaven sword was a magic treasure forged by the Grandmaster of Aoyama years ago. If he could make one sheath, he could make many more. That sheath could lock all things. If it could lock all things, could it also lock all swords? Peng Lang looked at his right hand with a surprised expression. The green rope of light tied his hand to the sword tightly. It was tied in a simple knot, but it couldn't be untied. Chunya's hand fell. The stone pestle fell on Peng Lang's chest. It was like a real mountain. Boom! It was a loud sound. Peng Lang disappeared from the spot. He turned into a black dot and disappeared into the distance in an instant. It was unknown where he would land on the surface of Mars. It was unknown if he could survive. Chapter 994. Chunya withdrew his fist. Countless stone powder fell from his fingers. He had lost 3 of his fingers, and they were trembling slightly, showing signs of exhaustion. His cold and stiff face was full of fatigue, and he even looked a little old. Defeating someone like Peng Lang with a single punch was exhausting, even though he had been preparing for a long time. He turned to the people among the rocks and said expressionlessly, "Now you've lost." Tong Yin said after a moment of silence, "So you've been waiting for him all along?" Yes, the immortals of the previous generations had set up this trap after seeing the black battleship on a dilapidated pirate ship in the Kuiper Belt. They first needed to confirm the identities of the people on the battleship. They all believed that Peng Lang was inside, and that he was the one they had to be most vigilant against. They had all read that important book and knew that Peng Lang's cultivation state was extraordinary and that he was the most likely to ascend, but he was also the most difficult to deal with. The first thing they needed to confirm was how to deal with Peng Lang. After arriving on the surface of Mars and finding that Peng Lang wasn't there, the immortals of the previous generations didn't let down their guard. Instead, they continued to carry out their plan in silence, waiting for him to appear. Peng Lang returned from space, weakened by the sword formation of the solar system. Chen Yu suddenly made his move. The immortals finally got rid of the greatest threat and heaved a sigh of relief, except for In Sheng, the immortal of sword. He looked at Chen Yu expressionlessly and said, "You know where he came from." Chen Yu said expressionlessly, "He won't die. I don't have that kind of ability. But he won't be able to stand up again and try to destroy the great formation of the Grandmasters." He then said to Tong Yin, "You're also at your limit. Do you want to die or surrender?" Tong Yin suddenly walked to the center of the field. The atmosphere became tense again. Master Yin opened his mouth slightly, wanting to persuade her, but he could only sigh in the end. Tong Yin walked up to the dilapidated robot and asked, "Are you all right? What do you think?" Shin Yunmai asked in an annoyed voice. "Looks like you're all right," Tong Yin said. Then he looked at Chunya and said, "It's not over yet." Chunya rubbed the space between his brows tiredly and said, "If you're still counting on that dog, we naturally have our own arrangements." As they spoke, the 8 immortals, including the fairy maiden and the first master, floated into the air and left the mountain peak at an extremely fast speed, heading towards various parts of Mars. Not long after, the 8 immortals arrived at a cliff 100 miles away and sat down cross-legged. 8 streams of extremely pure, immortal chi soared into the sky from the desolate surface of Mars. However, before they could enter the dark universe, they were blocked by the invisible barrier. From afar, the immortal chi that shot back looked like 8 blossoming golden flowers. It was so beautiful that it was captivating. Could this be the legendary 8 immortals crossing the sea formation? Kane Yang murmured as she looked at the magnificent scene. Chinya ignored her and didn't look at Tong Yin again. Peng Lang had already been defeated. All he needed to do was to trap or kill the dead dog with a great formation of 8 immortals crossing the sea. The dim light shone on the top of the mountain and shone on the robot that looked like a piece of scrap metal, making Shun Yunmai's head look ghastly pale. Tong Yin was a bit tired. She looked up at the night sky while supporting her waist with her hands. It was unclear if she was praying that the master dead dog wouldn't come back at this moment. Kane Yang came to the arena while supporting Yushan and Yuan Chu with Su Zai on his back. "Can you find a way to inform the Master Knight Howler?" she asked through her spiritual awareness. Tong Yin shook her head expressionlessly. Moreover, they had no idea where the dead dog was at the moment, to say nothing of the fact that Shunya was keeping an eye on them. What should they do next? Shin Yunmai suddenly yelled loudly, "Hey, Stone, do you know the name of this mountain?" This mountain is called Mount Olympus. In the childhood of the human civilization, they thought that Mars was the place where the gods lived, and this highest mountain was the divine mountain. According to the legends, the gods all died on this mountain in the end. Don't you think it's a bit inauspicious? The immortals who were setting up the formation were immortals and masters on their respective planets, no different from the gods. Would they die here? Chinyu didn't turn around, nor did he pay any attention to him. Kane Yang let out a bitter smile, thinking that he couldn't scare them since the defeat was already decided. Tong Yin was the only one who understood what he meant. "How powerful is the explosion?" she asked while gazing at his earlobe. Shin Yunmai said, "It's not a problem to blow up this mountain." "But it's useless," Tong Yin said. "Maybe the whole solar system can see it," said Shin Yunmai. He meant to inform the dead dog at the cost of his life. As they were talking, dusk arrived on Mars. The dry ice clouds in the sky were sparse, forming countless ripples when they were illuminated by the dim sunlight, which looked like the ocean waves. 8 immortals were scattered in different places around this large mountain, constructing the Great Formation. The moment the formation was on the verge of being completed, a person suddenly walked over slowly from the barren ruins in the distance. He seemed to walk slowly, but he actually walked a few miles with each step. As the person walked over, He Nun came into contact with him first. Seeing the figure, He Nun narrowed her eyes, as if she was facing a formidable enemy. It was Peng Lang who walked over from the other side of the wind and sand and the dusk. His sword was still tied by the green light rope, unable to get rid of it. It looked like a person whose arm was injured was tied by a piece of cloth. His face was pale, and his chest was full of the marks left by the burning fairy blood. He looked like a wounded soldier who had just returned from the battlefield. Yet, nobody thought he was weak or vulnerable. It was because he, who should have fallen to the other side of Mars and couldn't stand up again, walked over in the dusk. A gentle wind arose on the surface of Mars, ruffling his clothes and hair. The wind fell on the green light rope, giving off a tearing sound. The most eye-catching thing was the sword he held across his neck. The sword was bent very much, probably because it was damaged by Chun Ya's stone pestle, and it would break apart in the next moment. He none employed the most powerful magic treasure and employed the most powerful magic method without hesitation. A large invisible net was concealed in the wind and snow, moving forward. Peng Lang raised his sword horizontally. The sword was like a bowstring. He was like an arrow on the bowstring. With a light hum, his figure suddenly disappeared from the wilderness, shooting forward. The invisible net did not break, but was moved forward by his body. The entire world seemed to hear the sound of something tightening. The sand in the wilderness rolled. The fine dust danced wildly, but could not leave the range of the invisible net, forming a dust dragon in an instant. Peng Lang was at the very front of the dust dragon. It was a loud boom. He none was sent flying, smashing into a cliff more than 10 li high at an unimaginable speed. The cave was dark, and it was unknown how deep it was. The bright sword light was hidden in ordinary clothes and collars. The dust dragon also dissipated without a trace like smoke. Peng Lang's figure appeared, continuing to walk forward. A few steps, he came to the other side of the cliff. There was a white-haired old immortal dressed in colorful clothes. Peng Lang knew that he was the divine battering master, and said politely, "Greetings, senior." He none was suddenly defeated, and the 8 immortals crossing the C formation could no longer be formed. The divine battering master simply retracted his immortal energy, looked at the junior, and said with a smile, "Your posture is also strange." The green rope of light was indeed unbreakable. Peng Lang could not let it leave his neck, and could only maintain the posture of cutting his throat with his sword. He smiled embarrassedly, and barely managed to adjust the place where his fingers were holding the sword, causing the sword to be slightly further away from his neck. The divine battering immortal suddenly retracted his smile, and said seriously, "Please." As soon as he finished speaking, a thunderous sound immediately followed. Boom! The sparse, dry ice clouds in the sky suddenly became chaotic, and a bolt of lightning descended from an unknown place, disappearing in midair, leaving behind only a loud rumbling sound. This thunderous sound did not come from the sky, but from the small drum on the wrist of the divine battering master. The small drum did not beat, but it was the sound of thunder. The thunderous sound passed through a distance of several li, entering Peng Lang's ears, and also entering his sea of consciousness, causing his soul to tremble slightly. A faint sword light leaked out from his sleeves and collar, and there was even an extremely blurry figure of light. His sword ghost was almost forced out of his body by this thunderous sound. The thunderous sound resounded throughout the entire Mars, and naturally reached the cliff. Yuan Chu and Yushan's cultivation was not high enough, so they spat out a mouthful of blood. Cain Yang had not recovered from her serious injury, so she hurriedly sat down cross-legged and guarded her heart with Tao. Her face was even paler, as she said, "The divine battering master." The divine battering master's divine battering master's divine battering master was based on the method of using the thunder soul of heaven and earth to forcefully shake the spiritual soul of the cultivation practitioners. It was said that when cultivated to the extreme, it could even shake the Tao heart of the immortals. He had ascended for many years, and if he exerted his Tao method with all his strength, how powerful would it be? This was a cliff over 100 miles away, and even they could not withstand the attack of the small drum. So how could Peng Lang withstand the concentrated attack? Tong Yin looked at the corner at the foot of the mountain that she could not see, and listened to the thunderous sound again, her expression extremely solemn. All of a sudden, a different sound was heard amidst the thunderous roars. The sound was somewhat like the sound of a sword, but it was not as clear and bright. It was very gentle, and for some reason, even the thunderous sound could not cover it. At the foot of the cliff, more than 10 bolts of lightning descended from the sky. Without touching the ground, they disappeared in the air, leaving behind only the rumbling sound of thunder. In the next moment, the power of the thunder was suddenly diluted by a lot because that voice had arrived. The sound came from Peng Lang's finger. He lightly tapped on the sword. The already bent sword lay across his shoulder, looking like a musical instrument. The same posture, when doing different things, was a different existence. When he was fighting with Fairy, Peng Lang's posture was to raise his bow and shoot himself. But now, he was hugging his sword as a zither. His fingertips descended once again and instantly turned into countless shadows. Even the divine battering master could not see them clearly. The sword sounds continued to rise, gradually forming a line, like the sound of a zither. The sound of the zither pierced through the air, diluting the tyrannical thunder by a lot. The expression of the divine battering master changed. Peng Lang walked forward with the zither in his arms. In an instant, he arrived in front of the cliff. Holding the zither horizontally as a sword, he slashed forward. The divine battering master's wrist was tied to a small drum, and it was a piece of grass rope. That was definitely not an ordinary grass rope. More than 10 sword lights left the sword along with the sound of the zither, making a sizzling sound. More than 10 flowers bloomed on the surface of the grass rope, revealing the material inside. The wrinkles on the divine battering master's face became even deeper, and his eyes became even colder. Peng Lang took another step forward. The grass rope shattered. More than 10 deep cracks that were several miles long appeared on the cliff. There was a light paw sound. 2 intersecting cracks appeared on the surface of the small drum. The thunder that filled the sky suddenly became silent. "What a strong sword," the divine battering master said in a hoarse voice. Peng Lang extended his finger again and flicked the sword blade. Boom! As if struck by lightning, the divine battering master's immortal chi scattered, and he instantly retreated more than 10 miles. He sat down cross-legged with his eyes closed and began to recuperate. Peng Lang once again adjusted his posture and looked toward the other side of the cliff. That was Master Yin. There was no longer any sound of thunder on the surface of Mars, nor was there the sound of swords and zither. It was deathly silent, as if no one would disturb him. More than 10 gazes landed on the ordinary swordsman, filled with shock and confusion. He had returned from the solar system's sword formation and had expended a lot of energy. After being ambushed by Chunya, he must have been severely injured. Even his sword was bound by the green light rope of the Grandmaster of Aoyama. Even under such circumstances, he still managed to defeat 2 immortals of the previous generation, who were extremely powerful. How strong was Peng Lang? When he walked in the twilight, who could stop him? Could it be that he alone could change the entire situation? Could it be that the gods would really welcome their own twilight? Master Yin really wanted to fight with Peng Lang, but for the sake of the overall situation, he knew that he should retreat. He floated up on the cloud and prepared to join forces with the rest of his fellow Taoists. At this moment, a black-clothed Taoist blocked Peng Lang's path. The black robe fluttered, and there was a chill in it, just like the expression of the Taoist. The founder of the No Mercy sect, sword immortal benefactor. Peng Lang was slightly startled and bowed with his head lowered. He still maintained the posture of holding the sword horizontally across his neck. But he wasn't drawing the bow. He wasn't playing the zither. It was like he was wearing a shackle. Only sinners wear shackles. Posture is power. That you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.